6:15 and ended up in executive session. Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Smythe?
Take a roll call. Mr. Gartz?
Here.
Mr. Hall? Yes. Mr. Krupa? Here. Ms. Mangan?
Here.
Mr. Nasser?
Here.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Here.
Ms. Stites? Here. Mr. Wondrak? Mr. Adnizia?
Here. Thank you. Okay. At this time, we will start with policy. Dr. Gleason.
Thank you, Mr. Adnizio. We have three policies and one regulation up for first reading. The first policy and regulation is 2412, which is home instruction due to health condition. This landed on the table today due to the current situation around coronavirus, and this came through the Department of Education that we review, that we have a policy and regulation in place, which we do, and meets all of the requirements of the language for this policy as per NJAC. The only thing that we've added, this was even prior, we added some additional language to our policy and regulation. You'll see on the second page where we added the language, wherever possible, the teacher providing the instruction shall be certified for the subject, the grade level, and special needs of the student. That was not required or recommended at the time necessarily. We added that in to ensure that whoever's providing home instruction, we are looking as a priority for a teacher certified in that content area if possible. And then that same language is included in the regulation as well. So that is policy and regulation on home instruction. We will be using this policy, and I'll talk about that in a few moments when we get to curriculum, but we would be using this policy should there be a state-mandated school closure as a result of the outbreak of COVID. So it is timely that we're taking a look at that. So does anyone have any questions regarding that policy or regulation? Okay.
Lisa, you said this is the policy that would cover home instruction?
That is the policy that covers home instruction, that's correct. That, of course, if we were to use that policy with regard to school closure, the district is in the midst of preparing a much more extensive district preparedness plan with regard to home instruction that'll spell out in much greater detail what we would be doing for students who are now all considered on home instruction at that time. And that's, again, only if the health department declares a school closure.
So this policy seems very specific to an individual student. Is there a paragraph or something we should be adding that broadens the scope to say in the case of where we are today, so to speak?
Well,
So,
I think that if you look the second to last paragraph, and I was just going to actually mention that, it says the board reserves the right to withhold home instruction when the reason for the student's confinement is such as to expose the teacher to a health hazard or dangerous home situation. So that, I think, pretty much covers probably what
It
our
does,
concern
but I
would
just
be.
think it's still written as an individual student versus any sentence or anything. And not that it has to, I think this is going to happen again, I'm assuming, at some point with some other, issue. I don't know. I'm not the lawyer. I don't know if it needs to say it, but it's still very individualized versus district-based.
The guidance we received from the Department of Ed yesterday was that only in this circumstance, if the state was mandated a closure, that districts would be allowed to use this policy. And even though it may not be as broad as to apply in language to all students in the district, that was what our emergency preparedness plan, which we'll have together within the next few days, that's where that will spell out each of those pieces. Any other questions on that policy?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Dr. Gleason, why is it 2412 and R2412 and 3340 and 4340? Why do we do that? Is it something to do with I imagine the grievance has to do with the bargaining units?
Correct. So 2412 and R2412, one is your policy and one is your regulation. And then on 3340
right.
and 4330,
Got it.
remember your 3000s are your teaching staff members and your 4000s are your support staff members. So those will be the policies that are related to those members of the CBA.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we'll move on to the policies for grievance, both 3340 and policy 4340. Policy 3340 applies to teaching staff members. We were asked to take a look at the language of this policy and align the language with the current CBA. And so this language is word for word, how the CBA articulates how to resolve a problem between a member of the WTEA and an administrator, or any time that there would be a grievance. So you'll see where we have strike through. We have a process by which in the CBA it articulates at level 1. We start at the lowest level. The member who has a concern or a problem is asked to try to resolve that informally with their direct supervisor. And if they are not satisfied with that attempt at resolving the issue, it moves to the next level. At the next level, they would be filing a grievance, and you can see through levels 2, 3, and 4 that grievance, if it's not resolved at each level, would move up from the supervisor/principal to the superintendent, and then at its last level, at level 4, if the grievant is not satisfied with the superintendent's decision, the grievant can appeal to the Board of Education. So again, the language is aligned word for word with the CBA, and that's the same purpose in 4340, which outlines the process for grievance for support staff. And again, the language is word for word for both policies. The only change is that the only thing you should be aware of is that in policy 3340, one thing that drew our attention is that, let me find the language here. If you look at level 1 on the second page of policy 3340, it says any member of the association who has a grievance shall discuss it with his or her immediate supervisor or principal. In the event that the member has no immediate supervisor or principal, they are to report the grievance to their business administrator. Now, that's a blanket statement in the CBA. If you notice, this policy is teaching staff members. All teachers have a direct supervisor. Their principal would be their direct supervisor. But that statement is in the CBA. That would apply potentially if you go to support staff. There could be a support staff that does not have the building principal, or potentially a supervisor. In that case, we wanted to make sure that if it were to rise to the next level, that there is someone that would oversee that grievance process, and so then it would go to the business administrator. Question, Christine?
Yes, Dr. Gleason, and I apologize if this takes up a little time. I had looked at the CBA and I had gone over these policies. I have two quick questions. In the CBA, there is, it's Part C for teaching staff, but there is a stipulation in the CBA that discusses failure of the grievant at any step in the procedure. It's another paragraph that's in there, but it basically discusses what happens if the grievant, fails at any steps. I don't know if you want me to read it to you. It says failure by the grievant at any step of this procedure to appeal a grievance to the next step within a specified time limit shall be deemed to be acceptance of the decision rendered at that step. Failure at any step of the procedure to communicate a decision of the grievance to the grievant within the specified time limit shall automatically advance the grievance to the next level. I don't know if something like that should be included.
Okay, we can take a look at that and see if that's a language that the language recommendations my understanding was that it originally come from the association. So we'll make sure that we'll go back and see if there's some language that's missing from the CBA that we do want to include, and we can bring that forward to second reading. Was there anything else that you noted in there, Christine?
For the level 5, I don't know if this is something that needs to be included in a policy, but again, according to level 5, when you get to that part, there's a piece about the parties being bound by the rules and procedures of the Public Employment Relations Commission as to the selection of an arbitrator. The arbitrator's decision shall be in writing and shall be submitted to the board and the association and shall be final and binding on the parties, and the compensation of the arbitrator shall be borne equally by the parties. That's for 3340, and it's worded a little bit differently in support staff, and it kind of goes through how they'll come up with the arbitrator. Again, I don't know if that's something that's included in the policy or that's something that you leave to the CBA, but
I think
I
that-
just noticed it there, so.
Exactly. I think that the CBA will specify in much greater detail the steps that would, for rising to a level 5 or to any of the levels above the informal resolution, it will specify in much greater detail. I don't know that we necessarily have to have it in that specificity in policy, but I'll take it back and take a look at it again. Thank you. All right, we have one other item that's for discussion. It's not for first reading, but it's for discussion on policy. That's policy number 8210. Policy 8210 addresses the school year, and that the school calendar provides no fewer than 180 days of instruction. What I wanted to bring to the board's attention was the fact that on February 12th, there was a recommendation to the board that if the district did not use the 3 emergency closure days, we were having a pretty mild winter at that point, and still are, but if we did not use those 3 emergency closure days, that we would add 1 additional day to spring break, which would be that Tuesday, April 14th. And then, of course, the situation with this public health crisis has arisen, and so the recommendation from the Department of Health and the Department of Education is that all districts reserve any emergency closure days that we have until we, hopefully in such time that we are in either no threat or we are in a low threat situation. And so my recommendation would be that we follow that guidance and that we revisit this, and hopefully this will pass without any impact on the community, and we can revisit that day to give back to the calendar, or to the teachers, I'm sorry, and students and staff. So, but I think that we don't have any timeline or any knowing of how long we'll be in this situation. My hope is that by the end of May, at our May board meeting, that we would be able to revisit that conversation again and hold that day.
And Dr. Gleason, also, since it was the WTEA that brought it to our attention about possibly giving back the day, they understand the current situation and agree that holding this day in reserve in case something comes up, they do agree with that. So certainly, I would think we all support that idea.
Absolutely. Any questions? Policy? We'll move on. Mr. President, can I move on to curriculum? Excellent. The first item on the curriculum agenda is the district preparedness for COVID-19. Hopefully, you've been receiving the emails regarding the district preparedness. I'm really proud of everything that the district is doing and the way all of our both internal and external school community members are pulling together. I feel like we're really ahead of the curveball. We've had other districts come to us and ask for some of the steps we've taken, so I'm really proud of what we've done. I've been detailing out all of those steps and timeline in the email that was sent to the board on Friday and to the community on Friday. And I'm keeping that document dynamic so I can continue to add to that document when we took each of those action steps. So there were 6 recommendations that came from the District Preparedness Committee, and those 6 steps were listed in there. They included creating a dedicated space on the website that we can keep updated regularly. You'll see there's about 6 different useful links there: CDC updates, parent links, how to talk to your child, a variety of resources for parents. We also looked at classroom supplies, and the district is in the process of purchasing and making available to the spray bottles with HDOCs, which is our regular disinfectant spray, and paper towels so that we can be disposing of cleaning materials. We began that on March 5th. Hand sanitizers, wall-mounted hand sanitizers. We were mostly covered in all of the buildings, but as of last week, every classroom and common space has a wall-mounted hand sanitizer or a desktop hand sanitizer. One of the things that we were in the process of is replacing some of the sanitizer was not, in all of them, was not 60% alcohol, which is a CDC guidance to kill germs. So we ordered those supplies, and as those supplies are coming in, we're replacing the hand sanitizer that's in there with the recommended 60% alcohol. Teacher resources. Teachers were provided some resources and links for healthy hygiene reminders to use in instructions. We sent out some videos that were appropriate for secondary level and some for elementary level, and then some just for family use. Our custodial staff is putting hygiene posters that we receive from the CDC in the bathrooms and restrooms, so that just additional reminders on hygiene. The technology survey was sent out to families on Friday. As of today, around 4 o'clock, we had approximately 1,600 surveys completed. You probably got my phone reminder. I thought it would be helpful to put a voice on the reminder today, because I know parents have been getting a lot of emails and asking them to go in and complete that form. The importance of that form is that should there be an extended closure, we have a good handle on how many of our students have not only technology at home, but if they have a device, do they also have reliable internet? And we're in really good shape at the secondary level. Grades 6 to 8, they have a one-to-one carry initiative. If they have devices at home, we don't need to send devices home. If they don't, we'll make sure that we're sending them home. And then again, we need to make sure that there's internet accessibility. Same thing at the high school, they're already bringing their Chromebooks home. So we're really checking to see that they have Wi-Fi at that point. Emergency instructional plans. We began a plan last week, working in conjunction with the WTEA, to have teachers create 10 days of emergency lesson plans. Our K-5 teachers, I think they may have completed them today. We provided release time for a couple of teachers at every grade level to work to create their plans. They're using hard copy packets, like traditional packets, because they don't all work in an online environment. So we felt it was better and more appropriate to have online. But they might supplement that with some additional digital resources. At the secondary level, they're putting most of their, I would say all of their plans primarily in an online format. They use all of our digital assessments and practice resources can go into Google Classroom. The students have links. They have their passwords. And for students who might not have those resources, I've spoken to the building principals, and teachers are going to provide PDF hard copies to be able to send home with students also. So I think the administrators and teachers at each of the schools are really getting a good handle on providing those emergency instructional plans. One thing I do have to say, this is a real-time situation, and we're getting guidance every hour on the hour. There's something new that comes out in several meetings that'll still be held through the week. Again, if the district closes, we are still held to the 180-day bricks and mortar instruction. If the governor or the Department of Health closes, then we would revert to our policy for home instruction, and we would have the ability to potentially use our 3 emergency closure days first, where the district is closed, and then if we move into emergency days where we're applying remote learning, that will be something that the Department of Education will tell us at that time, and they will accept remote learning. There will be some samples that might have to be provided. There will have to be a discussion around teacher accountability, like how are teachers accountable for some of that online learning. So these are the things that we're working on in this plan right now, and working with other superintendents and boards in the area in Monmouth County. One of the other recommendations from the District Preparedness Committee was to address some of the generous donations. Parents always want to help out, especially when we're in situations like this, but we wanted to make sure, because of the nature of this situation, that the donations were appropriate for students. So we narrowed those down to 2 items, paper towels and Clorox wipes. And so we sent that home with parents, and so that they know the types of donations should they choose to donate. We are not asking for donations. Okay. The last couple of items are just the state requirement of the district preparedness plan. I'm working on that now, and I've submitted a draft to the Department of Education today, and that's going to be an ongoing document for all the districts. Okay?
Lisa, can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
In the unforeseen circumstances or unfortunate circumstances that we get that call, what's the next step?
So part of this plan includes a chain of command. So I'll be meeting with the administrators to go through like a level 1 where you would get the call. The next decision would be, would we be invoking the 3 emergency closure days first, which we would likely be doing to give us a little bit of time to set these plans into place. And we would be communicating before that time. Hopefully, we've got a little bit of time, if and when that even happens, that we can communicate to teachers how you would get the call, whether it would be through Blackboard Connect, that they should now be online. We would have to determine what number of hours. Once we determine if it's going to be 4 hours, that they would be accountable for, and this is hypothetical right now, but perhaps responsible for answering emails, checking the digital resources online that students are using, checking that their website is updated daily. And if we were to go beyond the 10 days, then continuing to plan and add additional resources and supplemental instruction. That's going to be a day-by-day kind of wait and see what happens.
And what is the, because I've heard a variety of answers, what role do we have to make the decision? If it's first-hand connection, second-hand connection, like the illness presents itself in a variety of potential family ways, when are we told to shut down and when are we making that decision?
So the Department of Health, I've been speaking to Margie John pretty much every 24, 48 hours. And so that call would come directly to the district if we have a case in the community and their recommendation if there is a school closure. So that comes directly from, if it's county or it's limited or contained within the community. Of course, if it's beyond that, the governor then would make that call with the State Department of Health if it's considered epidemic to the state.
So the only other thing is, I'm going to leave this with you. It's a crisis management matrix that I've seen other schools put out, which I thought was interesting. It could be helpful. That talks about all the different decisions that are pre-made based on the level of risk. So it takes away the need to decide it on the fly. Just a thought to
That would be
use
helpful.
when you're proceeding.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
You spoke on, so there's 4 conditions for us to get credit for our days. We heard about the health department obviously giving us permission, and the CNI plan for instruction. The 2 other components I didn't hear anything on. One is how we're going to maintain the delivery of services for our special education population, and the other is food service for our free and reduced lunch kids.
Correct.
Do we have a game plan for that yet?
We do, and that's already been drafted in the plan that we submitted tentatively today, and so we'll see if that meets with approval. So right now, Carol Duffy, our Director of Special Services, we met on yesterday, and we have a plan, first of all, with planned instruction for any of the students. Special ed teachers, that's part of their planning, where they include, accommodations and modifications in the plan. So those plans, to the best of the ability for them, those modifications to be applied at home will be in the plan. We also have a list, we have several special ed teachers that were also released to provide a list of additional activities for our students in MD and BD classes. With regard to related services, OT, PT, speech, which are difficult to deliver in an online environment. And I think you really can't practice telemedicine at all. So we would be looking at compensatory services where we would be providing services when the student returns, and that would be acceptable through the Department of Education. Although we are going to have, as part of that emergency plan, where case managers would be checking in with families, and there would be a list of activities, especially with OT and PT. Speech is a little trickier, although there are some online programs, Starfall, and a couple of other programs that Carol Duffy has identified that we could provide for families to continue those services. And then we also have to think about, within other special populations, our students with 504s, English language learners, students at risk, and even our G&T students. So all of those plans. That's part of our regular planning for all teachers. So when we say they're making emergency plans, they're not introducing new instruction, new topics. That's not advised. They don't have a teacher with them. So it would be primarily review work and work they're familiar with to reinforce what they've already learned. But we do have to still differentiate the instruction to the best of the ability. I mean, they're unusual times, for sure.
And the food service stuff?
Today, we received guidance. The first thing we were instructed to do was to provide the Department of Education with the number of students on free and reduced lunch. So we added those numbers in, so we have them identified by school. We submitted that to the Department of Education today. We did not have any guidance until around 3 o'clock today. We did receive some guidance from the DOE that states that the districts can apply for a waiver. Let me see if I have this right. That the districts can apply for a waiver to provide meals to students, eligible students, in the non-school setting. And Brian, I don't know if I have that exactly right. You want to weigh in on that a little?
Well, when you first hear waiver, it's a waiver to have to provide free and reduced, and that's not the case. Part of, through the programs that our schools are required to adhere to, for those schools that have to provide free and reduced lunch over the summer or when there's school closures, they have to provide those meals on school premises, which in this scenario, they're not going to be able to. So the waiver that the Department of Agriculture is submitting for approval from the federal government is to not require that the students be on the school premise to receive the free and reduced lunches. So a lot of districts we're all kind of communicating on how are we going to make this work. Are we going to attempt to make deliveries to those that qualify in the free and reduced, or what I think is going to happen is we're going to make available at one school in the district a pickup location where we can provide the meals. The next step that we're still working on is how do we make that happen? How do you make meals available? We have an in-house food service, and if we can't have staff coming in, or staff is not coming in, how are we going to, make the meals and make them available? And that's a hurdle every district is dealing with right now. And those that are outsourced their food service are working with those vendors who are saying that they're going to look to provide the meals and deliver them, but that's an unknown. What if they're unable to? And they're developing multi-day meal packs, 3-day and 5-day meal packs, so that somebody, if they're going to come pick them up, only have to pick them up 1 day a week. So these are all things that are being considered, but at this stage, our plan would be to make it available in one location, because that seems to be the most
Correct.
plausible.
We hope to have some further guidance on Friday. The Office of Emergency Management will be speaking to all the superintendents at roundtable and, again, providing additional guidance, because this is the big question. As Brian said, if we're closed and the school is closed for outbreak, we're not bringing in food service workers to make food, and we're not even sure where the food's coming from with regard to the limitations of an outbreak. So we really need more guidance there, and whether they engage services of Red Cross or outside agencies, we'll be looking for more guidance from the state.
Have we, and I'm just thinking about us because I'm thinking back to when Hurricane Sandy hit, we did MREs. We had a distribution point here in Wall that we had MREs, and we gave out food and MREs as to food and water and ice. And the government provided those, and I mean there was more than you could imagine. So I don't know if that was something that could be suggested. I don't know if the county has any in stock where they could maybe distribute them to districts, because I did read that is a concern, because unfortunately, maybe not necessarily in Wall as much, but in other school districts, certainly, kids rely on the schools for electricity and, a warm place to go and food. And certainly, unfortunately, things shut down, but, life still goes on. So,
And it's our understanding at this point, this is not a child nutrition requirement or, Department of Agriculture. This is a component of home instruction from the state.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but if there was a way, if we have to do something, maybe it could be MREs, and we could get those because they're already pre-made, and we could just give them out as a thought.
well, we'll keep all suggestions in mind as we move forward.
No, I just want to say I appreciate the work you both and everybody, teaching staff, principals. I've been dealing with it myself, so I hope that we're able to get through this as painlessly as possible. So thank
And
you.
hopefully
for
we
the update.
won't have to use any of these plans. That's the goal. But thank you, and you're right. The administrators and teachers and staff have done a great job. They really have.
Lisa, one more question. Maybe it's an F&F type of question, but it's tied to the coronavirus. Assuming we're going to be paying staff if we're out for an extended period of time, and does that include hourly staff? How does that, do we have any exposure to employee-based relations with a 4-week layoff or shutdown or whatever you want to call it? Is that an issue that we're thinking about, or is that an automatic pay everybody
Well,
no matter what?
And I think the other point to bring up, and I'll answer that first, is the difference between like this county health department closing schools or recommending it, the governor, and if the school district chose to, because we would not be receiving the credit if
That's
the school
correct.
district chooses and you tried to do the online provision.
That's correct.
However, so if it's the governor closing school, it's a state of emergency, all staff are paid. It's part of the collective bargaining agreement.
Yes. Okay. I will keep you updated as things go on, and anything that continues to come through our state agencies,
Which-
I'll keep you abreast.
As a carryover to that, you know, 'cause not knowing what the extent would be if we did close, we're making provisions in the business office, and, you know, we changed over as computers were being replaced, going from towers to going to laptops. You know, granted, they have the monitors and everything, so the staff in the business office can take their laptops home and work. So payroll's going to have to continue, you know, twice a month, even if we're going to be closed for an extended period of time. So we're almost at the stage where everybody's has that ability, but payroll and the accounting manager and obviously Dawn, my assistant, all have that capability so that we can attempt as possible to keep things running.
Okay. Next couple of, some brief items. We have new course proposal. I'm sorry, let me go back one. We have a research proposal. I've been mentioning to you the district's work with Dr. Paul Riccomini. He's working with all the teachers K through 12 on brain-based math strategies. He has asked if he can conduct a research study here with our 4th and 5th graders at West Belmar School. We have a policy that governs how we handle research studies for educational projects. And in that policy, it states that boards will support educational research projects that benefit learning and don't disrupt instruction. So primarily what Dr. Riccomini is doing is the 4 to 6 math strategies that the teachers have been working on with him over the past year. The teachers in those classrooms would continue to apply in a very direct manner, an ongoing manner with the specificities of the research study, and there would be a pre and a post test to see the gains in student achievement. It would be a non-identifiable study, so the students would not be identified. The study goes through IRB approval, so it is a legitimate study, and I think that it would really benefit the students and also the teachers to see what are the gains that students are making with these strategies. The teachers we've been getting really great feedback from the teachers on their work with Dr. Riccomini. Just quick strategies that make sense. They're based in research, and I think that we're looking at more professional development with him next year. So I think this study would really continue to lend credence to the work he's doing with the teachers.
Can you explain what the research question means to us laymen?
Do students who receive scaffolded practice opportunities with math writing experience greater gains than students who receive typical practice? So some of the strategies that Dr. Riccomini has taught the teachers there's called SLOT, which is where teachers use a specified time period to teach for 6 weeks, and then they go back at 6-week increments and pull the strategies back to students who still have not mastered those strategies. And there's brain-based research that says these 6-week intervals going back and remediating is what builds working memory and builds students' ability to really retain the, memory on these and to really use strategies independently, as opposed to typical instruction, as I guess the control, right? So if a teacher is using a typical strategy, they would not be using SLOT, work solution strategies, practice test retrieval. He's taught them, I believe, 4 strategies so far, and there's 2 more that are coming. So he would be applying those strategies as the test, and the control would be the typical instruction that's sort of built into Envision Math in 4th and 5th grade. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mr. President? Yes. Dr. Gleason, I love thinking about learning and thinking about teaching. I think that's great. I just have, and I know from our looking at our scores that math is an area that we want to continue to improve in. So that's a great place to be putting efforts. Is this something which he approached us and his colleague Elizabeth Hughes on, and as part of maybe a dissertation, or is this just their practice as teachers in theorizing what can improve instruction, like you just described?
It's not part of a dissertation. Dr. Rickamani is a pretty renowned professor at Penn State.
He does, okay.
And has written numerous books, and he's really well known in his field. So
Right.
I think this is really just to continue to build the research around the types of strategies that he uses with teachers and with students, and to your point about how did he approach us, he's been doing a lot of work with Mr. Abil over at West Belmar.
Okay.
And it's, as you know, a smaller school, so it's a smaller group that he can work with. And so there was a discussion between Mr. Abil and Mr. Rickamini that maybe we could start with that school and do a small test study there, because those teachers had a little bit earlier jump at the elementary schools than the others. So they feel they're ready to really sort of test and see if they've had success. So that's the reason.
Thank you for that
You're
information.
welcome.
So there is potential for this cross-pollinating to other
Potentially.
schools.
The idea is that it can be replicated, whether he's overseeing it or we're overseeing it from a district basis, a
Right.
pre and a post test with these strategies. That would be something we would be doing on some level anyway, after we've put in this time with him.
Right.
You're welcome.
Math's not my strong.
I have one quick update. I had spoken to the board about the Mindfulness Parent University. We originally had scheduled that for March 4th. Obviously, that did not happen. The presenter, Alicia DiLorenzo, she had run into a conflict at the end of February, and as I was waiting for the marketing materials, she told me that she was running into a bit of a crunch. So rather than trying to cram it in the end of February and start to advertise, we decided to move it back to April 22nd so that we have plenty of time to advertise it to families. I believe it's a really meaningful workshop, and there's a lot of value. This is a pre-K through 12 parent university, and it addresses, the epidemic of mental health issues, and we've had conversations in other meetings about that, and helping parents understand what's quote-unquote under the surface in our students and some of the challenges that they're addressing. So the title of the parent university is Are the Children Well? What Parents Can Do to Build Resilience. So I know that parents have spoken to us about some of the needs that they have and some of the topics for parent universities. So this will go out once we get past some of the coronavirus stuff, we'll make sure that we get this out so we have plenty of time to advertise. Okay? All right, the last item that we have on curriculum is a review of the student success goals with the strategic plan. I thought this would be a good time to, did I miss one? I'm sorry. I missed it, I jumped right over it. We do, we have 2 new courses, Wall Intermediate School. These courses we have 1 new one and 1 new course name, and I have a rationale behind that. So the first course, which is new, is Fiber Arts and Jewelry. This is for students in grades 7 and 8, and you can read the description there. It's basics of fashion design, and then the other part of that is also learning jewelry techniques. And we have a really strong art program in the middle school, and I believe that there's been student interest, and the teacher expressed the need for this course based upon student interest. The second course was formerly called Art Through the Ages. So this is basically just a request for a course name change, or a course name change. It's a drawing and painting course. In the past, the teachers felt that students were not picking this elective because they thought Art Through the Ages was a history elective rather than an art-based elective, and so they weren't getting the enrollment. So they wanted to rename the course something that's more appropriate to what they're actually doing, which is a drawing and painting course. And so that's the rationale behind that course change.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the first one, do we have sewing machines? Are they going to use sewing machines?
So I believe, I'll have to check with Mrs. Embaum, but I know that we had, similar to the Family Life program at the high school, we had a similar program at the intermediate school. So I'll be, checking in with Mrs. Embaum, but I'm assuming that we still have some of that equipment, whether that be sewing machines, and we'll have to make sure that we have the necessary resources for that course.
And so do we have any idea how much this course is going to cost with everything that's needed?
I do not have any of the costs associated with that right now, but I can certainly get that information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, sorry about that. The last one, as I said, is the review of the student success goals. So I thought this would be a good time to go over the student success goals from the strategic plan that was adopted in 2017. And as we're working to tentatively approve the budget, to look at how this year's budget supports the goals of the strategic plan, or are there objectives within the goals that the board would like to review. So student success goal number 1 is focused on ensuring that we have a strong curriculum plan. And most of those items, items 1 through 3, are just built-in job-embedded practices, a 5-year curriculum plan, the annual professional development plan that's required by the state. Opportunities for students for teachers for vertical and horizontal articulation. Those are things we do always. They are listed in the strategic plan, but those are not things that would really be negotiable. Exploring community resources, that was very important to the board, and I assume it would be still. We have a very strong community, and there are so many resources out in the community, so we always want to be exploring ways that we can tie the outside community with the internal curriculum. And then 5, this is one that I wanted to draw your attention to: research curricular resources that support social emotional learning. And you'll see that come up in goal 2 again, and that was an important piece of this strategic plan. So when we talk about curricular resources, mindfulness, wellness spaces, whether they're in this budget or in an upcoming referendum, when we talk about staffing with regard to school family liaison counselors, those are the kinds of needs that are supporting those objectives. So I wanted to bring that to your attention and see if there's any discussion around that.
I'm going to be candid, Lisa and Ralph. I have not had the time to digest all this and all the things that are going on with our district right now. And I feel personally that this is a lot to digest amongst 2 potential hires coming up, and the budget and Corona. And personally, for me, I don't have anything to add to any of this because I have not had time to digest it effectively. So I'm just letting you know that.
Could this be something we table for a future date to look into it? 'Cause,
Sure.
I agree. There is a lot going on right now, and certainly, encourage everyone. I was part of this when we did it, and I think you served on it too, Andy, right? Right? Yes. So I know several people here were involved and certainly looked at it. But, I would suggest in your free time, in between a meeting or 2, if you have it, just read it over. And, if anything jumps out at you or any suggestions, you can shoot an email, and then we can discuss this at a future meeting. But certainly, the idea of this is, during the budget creation right now, that if there is something that we need to tweak or alter, this would be the time to do it. So if everybody's in favor of tabling this for the time being and reviewing it and seeing if you have anything else to offer, or if you have something to offer now, certainly feel free.
Are you looking to table the actual review of it and consideration of revising it, or tabling everything that's identified on it?
No.
Which I don't think is the case.
No.
I'm just looking for.
No, just tabling the conversation on it for
Got it.
tonight.
Because there's certain components within here that, are included in the budget, and the budget
Right.
is being constructed, the things that are being proposed in the budget are based on the strategic plan. So, just want to make sure everyone's,
Right.
cognizant of that.
Yes. Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
President, so I'll take a little bit of responsibility, because last meeting I did bring that up, that the strategic plan is critical to our consideration, and being that so many of us are new and we all want to do a good job, that's without a doubt. It is difficult, though, to pick up this learning curve so quickly for us on all of this, but I do appreciate that the effort was made to bring the connection. The budget conversation goes on, so we can hopefully be here in the future and talk about these. The one thing I do want to point out, though, that there is a lot in these
Yes.
goal statements, and while I was a community member when this was being fleshed out, I think there could be some benefit for not only us, but the public at some point to have a more
In depth?
yeah, in-depth, thank you, review of the strategic plan, because this is not something that's been done by this board.
Yep.
And when I say this board, I don't mean the people sitting here. And it is a practice that school districts should be doing on a regular basis.
Well, we did, the last several years, we did have a review of where we were with the strategic plan. Maybe it wasn't as in-depth, possibly that maybe, if you're familiar with that at all, maybe as in-depth as maybe it should be, but certainly I think probably after June, certainly something on the second half of the year would probably be appropriate that we could do something like this, because I anticipate there being more time.
I agree, and I'm not trying to elicit anybody's backs up, but a review once a year with something that's this important, I mean, we could maybe be creative, especially when we get a new superintendent, and going forward on how we backtrack and look at these things, because that is critical to goal setting, whether you're in the commercial industry, education, or government, and all of them have their good people, or not good people, but good projects and successes with that. And then there are those that are not successful. And what definitely is the case, SMART, SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely. You always go back and look, and I don't believe that once a year is the approach that I would like as a board member for us to be taking.
Christine?
Mr. Adnesio?
Positively, just thinking about it more creatively, because then, and we go to future years, all of us here, with budget conversations, the dots will be connected more easily.
Well, plus a review will possibly bring up ideas to build on the next one for the 5 years after 22 going forward. So, Ms. States?
Just two quick questions, at least I hope they're quick. At this time, Crimson College Academy, partnership with Brookdale, is,
That's correct. We are no longer accepting applications for Crimson College, and that was the result of the program when it began. I believe it was probably about 4 years ago, maybe 5 tops. The program is set up on the AP model, where we don't have teachers teaching in-house. Some districts use an in-house model. In order to do the in-house model, you have to have teachers who have a master's in field to teach those college-level courses. And we did not have enough of those teachers to teach those classes in-house. So students have to go to Brookdale campus. And they also, the way that the two pathways were set up was that students were taking AP courses sometimes in their freshman or sophomore year. It's very rigorous. And so I believe at one point had about 7 or 8 students in the program, and then a couple of students left the program, and then the program enrollment declined further last year. Brookdale met with us and several other districts that were experiencing the same issue and suggested that we go to a middle college program where students are receiving about 30 credits in the course, rather than 1 or 2 dual enrollment courses that they have the opportunity to still receive 30 credits, but not the full Crimson College program.
Okay, that was number 1, thank you. Number 2, I don't know if now is the time to ask, but just because we're looking at a lot of different things. In terms of number 7, under goal number 2, researching student and community interest in the additional academies and the Fine and Performing Arts Academy, do we have any idea of interest in the 2 newer academies that are going forward? Do we have any numbers on those yet?
So tentatively, I received some information today that the enrollment right now was negligible on both the Music Academy for rising freshmen. We have currently, I believe, 11 students in the program. I don't know if I have that number exactly right, but approximately 11 students in the program that are freshmen and some 1 or 2 sophomores. But as of today, and applications are due, we do not have applicants. And I believe we have 1 potential applicant for the Art Academy. So it's something that we have to look at. Well, Future Educators Academy, remember, that is not actually in an academy status. That's an academy status. That's only an elective for next year, and the students would not indicate their interest in the academy till spring of their freshman year. So we're just rolling that out as the elective, and then we'll get a status from Mrs. Misa and find out what our enrollment's like there. You're welcome. Okay, so we'll go ahead, Mr. Sanfilippo.
Real quick, I just wanted to piggyback. So, Christine, I had those 2 things circled as well. So I'm glad we're sort of on the same page there. I guess we were talking about tabling the discussion, which I guess we're not going to table the discussion since we are discussing. But at any rate,
Well, no, it was open. If you had anything, absolutely. No, it's all good.
At any rate, just so to throw my 2 cents in terms of the goals and everything like that, I think it's important that we, do this assessment, and especially in reference to the budget. I think it's also for when the new superintendent comes in, they're going to have, some guidance in terms of where they want to go. If we're entering year 4 in this program, do they finish it out? Is it something that they want to kind of, come in with a fresh look? Sometimes, you might not want to be kind of like picking up where other people have left off. You might want to kind of have a new, approach to things. So I think it would behoove the board for us to, to make sure that we do our due diligence so we get as much information that, in reference to this plan pertaining to the budget, and also to give that information over so that the new superintendent can sort of do, with it what they will.
And I agree with that. I just want to make one point. I think that it's important that the board understand that the strategic plan is a visual representation of what the board and community values. And we would hope that a new superintendent would use this document, not necessarily to say that's not what I really want to do, but have a discussion around what it is that the board supports and the community supports. So going back to that idea of having the board really take a deep look at what the strategic plan says and what you think is important and what you think the community values. So when the new superintendent is here, that he or she can already understand that based upon the current board that sits.
Yeah, I mean, and looking at this, I mean, a lot of this stuff is like upper, high-level approach, creating survey students and parents. I mean, create digital resources and guide and course offerings and different things like that that are just done,
absolutely.
regardless, right?
Absolutely.
So I think, as Christine said, when you start kind of like fine-tuning a couple different things in terms of the academy offerings and those things, those were more specific that were, I think,
Yes.
geared towards that, which we can, discuss further, with the budget discussions.
And just to follow that up, I couldn't agree more with what Mr. Krupa said about the review of the plan. That's what keeps it a fluid document versus a shelf life project. So appreciate the clarification on what a strategic plan is meant to do. I think it's extremely important that for 6 new board members with less than 6 months' time, it would be valuable and helpful that if we're going to get this information on a Friday to discuss on a Tuesday, some updates on each of the objectives would have been valuable for us to know where are we in the progress with some of this, so we can think about whether we want to continue, what we value, what our input is. I don't, if that's there, I didn't see it. If it's on the website, please guide me. If it's out there and I missed it, I apologize for my naivety, but a strategic plan is only valuable when you can outline the progress on what was planned 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I don't see any of that for these goals, and that would be helpful to me.
And I'd be happy to provide the board an update of where we are specific to the objectives. There are on the website the mid-year presentations over the past, I believe, 2 years. There was a presentation of the status of the goals. I don't think one was provided this year, Mr. Gartz, but I think the prior 2 years you could see that, and I would be happy at the board's request to prepare a presentation showing where we are with regard to these objectives. You're welcome. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Mr. Smythe?
Okay, finance facilities. With regard to the items on the agenda, we can go through a number of them probably relatively quickly, with the idea of the annual school budget being at the end. But with regard to food service, the update for the month of February was a good month. About $11,500 was earned in that month, and year-to-date, we're $26,797,000 in the black. So, still progressing nicely. We don't have any facility use applications that are up for board review or approval. With regard to the Open Public Records Act, we have received 102 requests to date. We currently have 3 outstanding that I believe will be fulfilled hopefully by tomorrow, and then all 102 will be fulfilled. From a district standpoint, with regard to the personnel that have been working on Oprah requests for the year, we've spent $17,700 for those 102 Oprah requests, and the attorney bills through, I believe it's January is our most current bill is at $4,690 on Oprah requests, so we spent about $22,400 on fulfilling Oprah requests year-to-date from July. Okay. For the agenda for next month, next week, for state contract vendors, we had discussed in a prior meeting addressing how we're going about approving state contract vendors. So we have a resolution that's attached that would, rather than identify specific state contract vendors, we're identifying that we have the ability to use all state contract vendors. Okay?
Does that count for co-op vendors as well? Because this is specific to state contract.
This is only state contract.
Do we have a separate resolution that we pass every year for data?
Yes, we approve
example.
resolutions specific for those co-ops, whether EdData or ESCNJ, in the past, we've only approved state contract vendors and identified the individual contracts that we were, vendors that we were using.
Okay.
This is going to be more similar to how we approve the co-ops and ed data, where it's more of a blanket approval to use all the vendors within the state contract or the co-op.
Okay, so this is bringing us in line with
The other ones.
okay.
And this will be for the balance of this year, and then for April and May, when we start doing our annual renewals, resolution will be back on, similar to the co-ops and ed data that we approve. Okay, so that'll be on the agenda next week. Facility project updates. We're still working on with regard to using our school dude software with the projection, as we've discussed, for July 1, providing a more meaningful report for the Board of Education to review with the start of the new year. However, I want to update with regard to these two projects. Integrity Roofing, they're doing the roof replacement at the operations building. We have two change orders. One was of no dollar value, and that was just from changing the mechanism to adhere the insulation to the roof deck. That was approved by the architect. There was no change in the cost. And then the second one was to install or replace the curb for the boiler smokestack, and they're replacing the smokestack as well while they're doing it. It's going to provide a higher curb so that they have sufficient flashing, and install a double-walled smokestack, because currently I believe it's only single-walled. So that's the recommendation, and it was recommended by the architect.
So is this a change order or an allowance deduction?
This would be, it's a change order, but it would come from the allowance.
So you're reflecting in this resolution.
Hold on. Let me, before I commit to that,
What's the difference, Adam?
well,
Allowance is built into the project price, so it's going to depend on what is worded. It's pretty much means the same thing. They'll build the number into the contract so that if there is something like this that comes up, you just take it out of that as opposed to adding it onto the top of the contract. So depending on whether that number is the contract minus the allowance.
yeah, so if it ends up being the contract minus the allowance, then the dollar amount wouldn't change in the contract, and then at the end of the project, there would be a change order crediting any unused allowance. I can verify that before this goes on the agenda next week.
Okay.
Because I'm recalling that there was an allowance that was included in the project. I don't know if this didn't meet the definition of the allowance, because this came over as a change order from the architect, which was interpreted to mean that it was a change in the contract price. But
Brian, we approved this on October 15th. Is that what that says?
the contract,
Yeah.
yes.
When did work begin?
The work began,
About?
I'm trying to remember which it was tied to a break, but it was in November or December. So the bulk of the work was done. However, the metal edging has been a prolonged process. They're waiting on material, and then the installation has been slower than you would expect the metal edging. But it's waterproof, the material is down, and they've just been working on the metal edging.
Did we go into the project with an expected time frame that was or was not met effectively, or do we not gauge that because it's multiple facets of timing and delivery and et cetera?
Well, I think the argument would come down to, with regard to substantial completion, contractor met substantial completion, and then these were, the loose ends and punch list items, which we're not even at punch list stage, and we've been having full use of the facility throughout the process, so. Okay. So I'll follow up with that one. With regard to the second bullet on item 5, the trailer removal, I've attached the quote proposal from Monmouth County to remove the trailers. The, just pretty broad in scope, or I don't want to use the term vague, but it's basically they're removing the trailers, and that's what they've committed to do. The exceptions are, all asbestos and any other environmentally related items, which would be the same if it was being publicly bid or bid out. And also the disconnected utilities, which the district will do. And then the one discussion, well, the disposal of debris, we'll have to pay for that, but steel will go to a local vendor and we'll actually receive funds for that. It will go to Blewett Steel, and then the other certain debris will go to Lurch, which is local, and the bulk of it will go to, it's Mazza Recycling. I've spoken to both the township and the county with regard to who they use, who they recommend, and the county will be delivering the debris to those locations. And then where the shed roof of the canopy or walkway attaches to the masonry of the gymnasium, this was, I think, an area for the contractors that were bidding on it as well, like what that entails as far as making those repairs. But it's masonry work. There's a ledger board that's kind of like bolted through the wall, and we'll just make the repairs to the wall to make sure that it's watertight, and that's something that we're fully capable of doing.
Are we doing this in-house, or are we gonna go out for the smaller like the utility?
Well, the utility disconnect we're going to do. I mean, it's the water. We disconnect from the boiler room and the electric as well. We have the staff that's able to do that. We're not looking to contract out with anybody else to perform this work, and other than utilizing the county.
Is that including the IT work, like the network disconnect, the clocks, and
everything
PA
that was deemed salvageable from the trailers has been removed by our staff already.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brian, the letter C, the contract will be in place for disposal of all debris. Is that a separate contract from this?
That would be contracts we have with those vendors, such as Blewett's.
So they stayed contracted vendors?
Well, no, it's that we have accounts with them so that they can receive our debris and bill us as opposed to billing the county.
Gotcha.
So essentially, they need to be approved vendors for the district, in that we can establish a purchase order with them prior to the county delivering the materials. So we're estimating, and it's going to be an estimate for the debris. Blewett Steel, we're not going to be billed anything. We'll actually receive funds back. But, and can't hold me to the number, $10,000, $15,000 for the tipping fees for the disposal of debris. Trying to estimate the tonnage of 2 trailers. Concrete's going to go, whatever clean concrete we can dispose of at Lurch Recycling, because it's $8 a ton as opposed to $116 a ton. We'll have the concrete delivered to Lurch, and then the regular, the majority of the debris would go to Mazza Recycling.
Brian?
And is there an estimate that once the trailers are removed and everything's shut down, that we're going to have to do another site assessment to see what kind of groundwork needs to be done to pave or put dirt down or rock or something to smooth it over or make
Well,
it?
they're going to be pulling the footings. They're going to regrade and level it off for us as well, and we're going to go back and with the intent of top seeding and mulching to put grass back in that location.
Thank you.
I know we had spoken about doing environmental testing under the trailers. Was that something that occurred?
No, we have not done any environmental testing. No.
Okay.
What would we be testing exactly? The soil, the water,
Yeah.
anything that's there? I mean, the air, the?
Soil for contamination. I know there was concern whether there was sewage leaks or other issues underneath of it. Is that something that we can?
Well, we can, once it's removed, we can do sampling at that point, or look to do it beforehand.
Preferably beforehand, before we disturb anything,
Okay, sure.
just to get a baseline.
Yes, we can.
Mr. Smythe? When do we anticipate this project being done?
Over the break,
Spring
in-
break?
Yeah,
Okay.
over the break in April.
And with the concrete, any way we can get a better deal at Clayton Block?
Well, it's $8 a ton for the disposal. I don't know what Clayton Block charges, but we can ask them.
Okay.
The concrete at $8 a ton, you're probably talking less than $400 or $500 at the most, right?
I don't,
Yeah, I wouldn't think there's much there, being an old mason, but, you know, someone else, Clayton gives it to you for 7, 6. You're
Yeah.
talking about, you know, $50, probably.
Footings and, they have dry stack block on top of it, so. And if they're able to separate the sidewalk, that portion of the sidewalk that's coming up. But we don't anticipate it being a lot. Okay. The Wall High School Stadium field condition, I provided photographs. These were taken the day following pretty significant rain event that we had. At the beginning of last week, you can see, both sides are affected by it, but the home side holds it deeper and for a longer period of time. Two things, we've contacted Monmouth County Division of Parks. We had a couple managers from their golf course department come out and walk the fields with us, make some recommendations. They recommended a consultant that they use who we contacted. He's going to come out next Tuesday to take a look at our field, make recommendations. And the county also made recommendations as far as a game plan moving forward to try to improve the condition of the turf on that stadium field. And that's not specific to the drainage, that's just specific to the general condition of the turf and maintaining it and trying to get a better product for us by the fall season. We've already, based on that discussion yesterday, we've aerated and seed and put seed on it, overseeded because of the temperatures that we're having. That was recommended by the county. So we're going to, closely monitor the progress and the condition of that field as well as all the fields, but specifically that, that football field because it has deteriorated over the last couple years. With regard to the drainage, our engineer is Bill Edwards Engineering. We've asked him to come out, take a look at it today, which he'll be providing a proposal to the district for recommendations, come out, do a survey, and make a recommendation to improve the drainage, which may be beneficial for more of a long-term goal. I don't know with that type of time frame, bringing in the engineer, that we would have sufficient time to address it for this season, for the fall season. So we're, taking steps to try to improve the drainage there, whether it be putting in, trying to regrade the area on the home side where the players stand, putting in some inlets with like an in-ground recharge system, and part of the problem is the water that runs off the area that is south of the stadium by the softball field, all that water just runs in that direction, and it's connected to the installation of the new bleachers. But it all runs north to the back of the property, and on that home side, what used to perhaps run underneath the bleachers is now ponding right in front of the home bleachers. That is also where all the players stand, which doesn't help the situation, wears it down, and has created the low spot. So we're going to be doing a combination of regrading and trying to install some inlets upstream to try to collect the water first and see about recharging it right there, or perhaps running the pipe the length of the field so that it dumps in the back. And that's the game plan that we're doing in-house to try to address it for the fall season, in combination with the improvements and the recommendations of the county with regard to the overall treatment for the field.
Brian, will we be able to see those recommendations in some kind of report?
Yes.
Okay. And then, was there any eyes put on the practice field, which is much more heavily used and far worse shape?
Yes, but that's a different scenario. So the same practice of, or the same treatment procedure for the varsity field is going to be applied to the practice field, with the exception of the issue of the drainage, because that's a little bit more, not as critical on the practice field. As far as the condition of it, that's topsoiling and seeding. We're meeting with Tom Redu. They're looking to obtain funds perhaps through the boosters to put sod. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to have the ability to put sod on the practice football field. But whatever treatment plan, we're taking initial recommendations from the county, and we initiated them on the varsity field. The consultant that we're meeting with next Tuesday would be for both fields. And part of the recommendations was soil sampling, so we'll be soil sampling both fields, and testing of the irrigation water that we use, because we use an irrigation well, and whether that's contributing to the to the condition of the field. So and based on that, the results of the soil test, the water analysis, then what the county uses this gentleman for is to then make a treatment plan specific to the field based on those results, as opposed to saying, hey, we put a pre-emergent down, we put fertilizer down quarterly, and we overseed in the fall. This would be more specific based on the conditions that are actually out there, which we hope to then reap the benefits of.
And I know we can't go backwards, but just out of curiosity, because common sense tells me there's something there to this. The installation of the cement and the bleachers that were installed, was drainage running and underneath and over all factored in and missed? Does somebody owe us some money for a miscalculation? Or why did we put in such a huge set of bleachers that were necessary that are going to cause secondary and third issues of drainage? Or is it just by nature that things have occurred this way?
I think it's a combination of, it's related to the construction of the bleachers, but the construction of the bleachers ended up impacting what happened on the, where the water is staying on the field as opposed to running off underneath the bleachers. So as much as it's a result of it, there was also some complications during construction. We've had a pipe that broke in the area, which caused severe flooding that we had to fix. So there was some, I don't want to use the term blame, responsibility for the condition being associated with that, as well as causing the low area to preventing the water from running off. So if it's something as the board wants to discuss further, as with regard to, do we feel that we should be pursuing something with regard to responsibility on the bleachers, we can do that. But it's going to be a difficult process.
Who were the professionals for the bleachers?
We had, the architect of record was FVHD, Faraday Vice, Thorne and Freytech, our former architect of record.
Which is good. Who else? Architects, engineers, surveyors, any other consultants that were used in that
No.
process?
We had an engineering firm, right?
No.
It was all, I thought it was, we also had an engineering firm we hired that put the bleachers in. Because we did have a discussion at one point about, as a board, maybe earlier this year, last year, I don't even remember when it was at this point, but, there was concern that this project, because of the project, it resulted in the water runoff onto the field. And I know at the time, several of us felt that it should have been planned for and there should have been more done on that. So certainly if that's something we can still explore, because I guess it kind of just died at the wayside.
Well, a contributing factor to it, after the bleachers have been in there now 2 years, that the condition has grown worse.
Well, the condition was pretty bad from the get-go with it, though. I mean, when it first went in, there was water all over the place, and then it was, after a little while, then, well, we had a sprinkler break. That was an excuse that was given.
Well, it wasn't an excuse. It was a contributing factor, and that was, it wasn't a sprinkler. It was the sprinkler line. So that was the initial contributing factor that had that was reviewed and then eliminated as a cause. But there was times when it would rain and we didn't have the ponding condition, for an extended period of time, because I'd been out there after a significant rain and it wasn't, and then, another rain, it would be there. So I don't know if it's a contributing factor of the water table. Those are things that, like Edwards Engineering would investigate as part of their proposal, because they're discussed, having test pits, et cetera. But it's something that has been a problem, but I think it has progressed, or has gotten worse since the installation of the bleachers.
I just want to say, I know we've gone out and looked at the conditions out there, and it's part of an overall deficiency in the site, athletic sites themselves. I mean, drainage here, drainage there. The entire athletics area needs some investment. As we talk about referendum stuff, I think, we can look back all we want. It's not going to change the conditions we're at now. There's so many mitigating factors, and just in general, we need to, as a community, look to that as how do we move it forward instead of looking back. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents. There are, from a drainage standpoint, almost no drainage out there. The track is pretty much asphalt right now because it's so dry. The practice fields you mentioned, the turf, it's in rough shape. The whole area needs an overhaul. So, rather than
contributing factors, the drainage for the whole area south of the stadium drains over the football field.
Yeah.
It doesn't go around, it doesn't go under it.
I'm with you. I know we can't go backwards. My future concern is the cement dinosaur that we put in going to limit what we can do going forward? I think that common sensely says you got this big thing here that's in the way of what we do in the future is going to cause us more investment that maybe if thought differently before, we would have thought differently. That's all I'm trying to get to. If not, then I'm wrong, and that's fine.
You engineer around it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
You can always engineer around it. My thought is that costing us more money, or should we have been more forward more to not have done it maybe the way we did it a year or two ago? But it doesn't matter at this point. I don't want to, we got a ton of stuff going forward, so I'm sorry for bringing it up.
No, it's a good question because, when you look at it, I don't think the site itself was engineered for the usage that we're trying to get out of it. And these are things and upgrades, if we put a new track in, it's got to be graded, it's got, there's a lot of other things. You're going to have to put drainage in anyway. So you include it as part of that project because you're going to need everything. Instead of doing it piecemeal, everything's going to have to work together to get all the water out of there anyway.
That's what
it's going to be part of an overall site thing if that's something that we do decide to do.
Mr. President, that last point, I think, is the most important in terms of going forward. We need a comprehensive plan because this is, as you said, been going on for a long time, Brian. And I appreciate Russell's point, though. If there is some kind of action that can be taken for negligence on somebody's part or bad planning and it's not too late, we have to be diligent in terms of making sure that any project that goes forward doesn't have this issue. But if we have to capture funds for the mitigation or the comprehensive plan, I don't see that as being a wasted effort.
I mean, I recall there was issues with the drainage, and then there was some concerns about when they came in and laid the sod, that the level of the sod, and then you had the engineers pointing the finger at the people who laid the sod, and the people who laid the sod pointing at the engineers. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, this is terrible, right? So, we got to figure something out, a way to remedy this, so that, we're not sitting in a puddle.
Well, and that's what the goal is we're trying to address now, and I would probably say any other discussion that we want to have regard to anything in the past that we have separately in executive session.
Tell the superintendent of the county if he can make our field look like the 7th hole at Hominy Hill, we'll be in good shape.
pass that along. And I have to tell you, they were great, and they sent a follow-up email report based on things we discussed with the recommendations as far as the plan moving forward. They provided us the contact for this individual who travels the country that they use, golf courses all over the country, as a consultant. So we'll see what he has to say when he comes out on Tuesday. With regard to 7, I only put it here to see if there was any additional questions, but I think it was covered by Dr. Gleason with regard to the preparedness committee. So if you don't have anything, I would move on to item 8 with the budget. There was information that went home this past Friday. I provided a budget for consideration for the purposes of approving a tentative budget. It's balanced with the revenues and appropriations. Tried to provide some additional information based on our prior discussions at our workshop meetings. And again, we have a requirement of approving a tentative budget because that needs to be submitted by the 20th of March for compliance review by the Department of Education. Our public hearing is scheduled for April 28th. The budget includes the things we've previously discussed, includes the positions that were proposed. They're currently in there. And it utilizes, the revenue from a tax levy standpoint is at the 2%. And we're drawing down on the maintenance reserve to fund a portion of the maintenance, the required maintenance budget. And we're drawing down on the capital reserve for the funds that are, or the projects that are included in the capital facilities budget, which is only the proposed improvements for a student transportation system as part of the shared service agreement with Howell. As discussed at the previous meetings, that we can identify additional projects to include in the budget, but they would be, as we've discussed so far, or we can continue to discuss what the revenue source would be, to fund them or anything else that's in the budget. But we have the ability to fund the capital improvements from a drawdown from the capital reserve account, so that it would essentially be a neutral with regard to the other revenue sources.
Brian, just a question about the updated numbers on the increases. They changed pretty significantly per average house assessment of 481,500.
Yes.
In the last packet of stuff that we got. So just to clarify, a 2% tax increase or tax levy for the operating general fund is a $15.50 per year charge on the average house in Wall. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And I'll tell you what the difference was.
Yeah.
We have our debt service. In calculating the tax rate, I used the state aid as, rather than deducting the debt service aid that we got, I added it to our debt service obligation. So rather than calculating the tax rate at the tax levy being 2.3 million, it was calculated at 3.9 million. So that's the swing from what was initially being discussed, $75 to $15. When I was preparing the resolution for the packet, identifying what our debt surface is as far as the appropriation, and then comparing it to the tax levy for the debt service didn't make sense, and that's when I went back, reviewed it, and identified what the issue was. So, and the reason why, especially if you were to compare a zero amount, each year, it's a factor of what our general fund tax levy is, and then what the rateable base is for the community. And the rateable base for 2020 increased by about 53 million compared to the rateable base in 2019. So now our general fund tax levy is being divided up among $53 million more in rateable base. So therefore, if the tax levy was not to change, it would actually be a decrease because it's being shared by a bigger base.
So
that makes sense.
So Brian, if you were to eliminate like that 53 million you just talked about, and let's say if we only had last year's base, what would the increase be at 2%?
If we went a 2% increase and we were using last year's rateable base, it would have been about a $60 to $65 increase.
Okay, because when I looked at these numbers, I looked at them and I was scratching my head. I said, it just didn't make sense. I thought I was missing something, but now that the tax base is wider, it certainly makes more sense. Now, one additional question. I know in previous budgets, and you even said it a couple weeks ago, that even a zero, if you budgeted flat and it was a 0% increase, you would still have an increase in the budget, in the tax levy. So, but with this one, a 0% is truly zero, correct? Because it would show a decrease of $37.05.
And that's because the rateable base has gone up. So if the rateable base doesn't change, and you have a 0% increase in your tax levy for our fiscal year, typically it's going to go up only because the half of that tax levy
Right.
is greater than the half from last year. So the end result of the tax levy that gets applied to the rateable base is bigger than it was the two halves from the prior 2 years.
Right. So with the last couple of budgets we've had, has our tax base pretty much stayed the same, and then there was a big jump this year? Or does it generally grow a little bit every year?
It varies. Last year, I don't think there was a significant change. The year before that, I believe there was a drop in it. So that would, artificially increase the school's tax rate because the rateable base went down as opposed to going up. But I'd have to look at, those numbers. But it does fluctuate. Typically, you would think, depending on the economy, that it would always grow. But it's not the case every year. Sometimes it does drop.
All right, so that leads to my questions, because I understand, now that bit of information, which I didn't have last meeting, makes more sense, how this works a little better based on what we were talking about last month, or last meeting. How do you come up with 53 million? Is that something you get from the town?
The town gives us the rateable base. So they give us the rate that was finalized last year because they determined the final rate. They provide me the rate, the average assessed home, and what the rateable base is for 2020.
Right, so just so I'm clear, and some of the other board members that may not be math people, what you're basically saying is last year the town collected all the money from all the houses and business in the town, and this year new houses were built, so now there's more people paying taxes, so there's more money. So even if you kept even if you didn't raise the rates, you would just you would gather more income just because there's more people paying property taxes. Effective. I mean, that's in a simplified version. You have a bigger tax. Your tax base broadened either by new additions to existing buildings or new homes or reassessments, which I don't think we're doing right now. If I'm not mistaken, we're not in the middle of reassessment. So it's only new buildings, I'm pretty sure. So now that you have more stuff to tax, you're bringing in additional tax, and since you're trying to hit a number, everybody else has to pay a little less if there's new people paying that weren't paying before, is kind of where we're at. So that's how these numbers can work. When I first looked at it, I'm like, if it was stagnant, and I didn't think that you would have the ability, the town would be able to give you the ability to know that on the fly. I thought that would be a once-a-year thing, or perhaps every couple of years that they would do a reassessment, not a reassessment of the property, but a new look at what their tax ratables were.
It's done annually.
Right.
Because that's what their tax rate is based on as well. And
Right.
I'm pretty sure Wall Township was part of that pilot program through the county where they reevaluate every year. They don't do a full reassessment, but they recalculate, and the goal of it is to be as accurate as possible with regard to what the rateable base is. But each year, the county publishes it, but each year the town provides the rateable base.
Okay.
And it does not always go up. So, and it's not, I don't want it to be semantics as far as you collect more revenue because the tax base has increased. It's a combination of what the school district's taxes, what the municipalities, they're collecting whatever the dollars. It only increases if the tax levies increase. It's coming from a bigger pool, so then the individual taxpayers are paying less because there's more people paying it. Yeah. So,
Brian, the calculations, just out of curiosity, in terms of tax impact, do we, I know you know these rules, so I'm just going to ask you, it's going to come out the wrong way. Does the tax assessor in town verify these calculations for us?
yes, they certify them. Once we go through the Department of Education, that's part of the submission to the Department of Education. That's why I'm sometimes reluctant before we get to the tentative budget, because that's all entered through the Department of Education's website through their program, which isn't like another check or making sense. But with regard to after the public hearing on it, I have to submit to before finalizing it to the Department of Education, I certify it and the tax assessor certifies it.
Very good. And then, question about the bank cap. So we talked last time about the possibility of going to 2% plus bank cap and using bank cap if we wanted to really, accelerate revenues. There's $1,023,828 listed as bank cap, and that's not all for this year. Is that what you had said? It's, there's a percentage or something?
Well, it could be used for
Right,
this
but
year.
what has to be used this year, I guess is my question.
And I'm going to rely on the number I used.
I think you said 600, didn't you?
I did say
Or somewhere in
600.
that
Again,
ballpark?
that's a function
That's
of the
fine.
department.
But just as, hypothetically, it's 600.
It's going to be between $400 and $600.
So if we-
600,000.
Are we able to, I mean, it's an increase to the taxpayer, I understand that, but is there any magic potion to a 1% increase and use the bank cap versus a 2% increase? Is there a difference in that calculation and/or
It's not
math?
permitted.
Got it.
You got to use the first 2% and then you can use the bank cap.
Gotcha.
Because at the end of the day, it would be the same thing.
Got it. Got to be creative, because they are. One question about the expense side for me. So we're on a projection or a proposal to hire teachers that look like they add up to roughly $450-some thousand. You gave us the projections, or actually the actuals from the past 2 years of budgeted and non-budgeted hires, that in the past 2 years, if you add them up combined, come up to $419,000. And they're not all teachers, obviously. There's school safety officers, paras, et cetera. But a total new hire base of $419,000. And this year, we're projecting or trying to inject $452,000. Maybe this is a Dr. Gleason question. That seems like I don't know, that's a big jump over a 2-year period, and we're more than 2 years combined. It's teachers versus other subjects. I'm just wondering, is there something that caused 8 teachers at one time versus 2 per year or 3 per year, perhaps?
But just before you, I just want to clarify. Last year, we only budgeted for one position.
No, I understand. I'm saying the cumulative over the last 2 years was $419,000 of new hires, according to the chart you
Well,
gave
no,
us.
that's the breakage. So I would have to, should add the totals for all the columns. That's the breakage. So
gonna
that's
be a
money
lot
we
more?
did not
It's a lot more
anticipate,
than that.
that we had not budgeted.
Can you add that up for me real fast? Because that's the number I thought it was. I'm sorry, I didn't look at
Okay.
it. I figured, I was is it the same number? No, because the first one's 65 and you're adding 8,600 at number 1, so that's off by 60 grand.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get to is, we're looking to add almost $500,000 in new salaries in 1 year. How much did we add over the last 2 years, and how does it compare, and where is the challenge with that?
Can you repeat that? I'm confused. You're looking at this, right?
I'm looking at this chart that we were just given today and also given in our thing.
Right, so.
You add the actual salary column, how much does that add up to be? All of those numbers. It's not 419, I was just told. That's the breakage column.
Right, but that would mean that in the year 1920, we budgeted for 57,000. We actually paid that person 65,000. So we paid him 8,000 more than what we budgeted for. So you're right in the sense that if you go through and add all these up, the 419 is the breakage. So you really got to say, well, what's the additional?
I'm just trying to get a gauge for my own understanding. If we're going with $500,000, almost $500,450 of new hires this year, what was it like the last couple of years?
Yeah, I agree with that.
I just want to jump in. I just feel like it contributes to trends in education as a whole, and maybe Dr. Gleason can, speak to that. School safety officers were obviously essential to, implement within our district. So, moving forward there, now we're seeing, like, you'll see trends in education where there'll be, a plateau of hiring for a while, then all of a sudden you're going to get a bunch of new hires, you're going to see, teachers all of a sudden retire, there'll be like a bunch of retirements, and it just goes with, the trends of education. But I really think that we have to focus on, class size. So, as long as we stay focused on making sure that our class sizes are at an appropriate amount, we're going to see trends come and go. We're going to see, bouts of teachers retire at a certain time. The paras, it's essential. Like, if a student needs a para, they need a para. It's coming from an IEP, or that there's no way around that. So I just think, when it comes to education, that we're being fiscally responsible, but we also have to maintain, a certain expectation within our classroom, because if we don't keep our classes at a small and reasonable size, everything else that we're trying to do around it, that doesn't matter. What matters is the education that they're receiving. So I just want to point that out.
Aaron, I would agree with that, but I think, just to Russell's point, I mean, on this new positions for the last 2 years, the way I read this, there's only there's only two, what you would call, and again, I don't mean this in a mean way, but it looks like only two primary teachers. The rest are either instructional paras, school safety officers. Nothing that's going to theoretically cut down the size of the number of students per class. So I would be all for, if you said to me, we need to hire 5 new teachers because the influx of kids required us to add more sections of 5th grade or 4th grade or 3rd grade, I think your point would be spot on. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think what we're seeing is additional jobs that we're asked to fund, that the taxpayers are asked to fund, that don't decrease class size. Now, I know the 8.5 that Dr. Gleason brought up this year, I think there are 2 or 3 that do that, okay? So I think that, to your point, that is the case. But I think it's fair to say that the majority over the last couple of years have not significantly reduced class size based on the hires that were hired. And now, I'm all for school safety officers and the paras, and again, I'm not criticizing that we do that, but I just like to also be on the other side of this, that we're not necessarily just going to hire 10 new teachers and then all of a sudden everybody's going to have 15 kids in a class and it's all going to be great. We're going to hire these teachers, and we're pretty much going to be on the edge on all these class sizes anyway. We're not really doing a lot to satisfy that particular need. And again, I don't know what the answer is. That's why we're here trying to work through it. But again, this is over and done. This was already the last 2 years, so we can't do anything about these. But it is informative to me and the board that, and what I didn't understand, and maybe Brian can explain, is last year we had 1 budgeted position, but it looks like we hired 10. So that would mean that we budgeted for 1, the board budgeted for 1, and then what happened? The superintendent went out and hired people without
we
budgetary.
talk about reducing class size. So we budgeted 1, it was the nurse, but then the 2 regular ed staff that were hired for the current year were based on class size. So we hired a kindergarten teacher at both Central School and West Belmar because the enrollments increased, and because of class size, we ended up hiring teachers. They weren't budgeted.
Gotcha.
They had been discussed and considered, but we didn't include it in the budget, but then the numbers showed up, and you're going to end up hiring a teacher.
Right.
The other positions, end up being required. With regard to instructional paraprofessionals, that ends up, that's not arbitrary. That is the director of special services based on the number of students that are in a self-contained class, or if a student is within their IEP is assigned a one-on-one paraprofessional, we're going to hire a paraprofessional whether it was in the budget or not. So that's what all these are. None of these were, hey, we just decided to hire another staff member.
Right. Okay. So
and the school safety officers, that's because we added the second shift. So it would cover, we'd cover all the hours the students are there. So that was the additional part of the school safety officers.
Right, so again, for someone new like myself, what happens when we spend all this time putting this budget together, right? And everything's laid out really nice, and it's literally down to the dollar. And then we have our budget for what we're gonna spend, and then something like this does happen, we find ourselves coming September, and we find out, oh my goodness, we do need X, Y, Z. Where does that money come from out of the budget? Where are you taking Rob and Peter to pay Paul to make sure that we have enough money to pay for any last-minute additional staff that we may need based on some of the things you just discussed?
Well, with regard to salaries, so the first step would be, did anyone resign or retire after we've already set the budget? So that's positive breakage. So if somebody leaves at the top of the guide, we hire them at lower steps, so we get breakage of $30,000, $40,000. So that would be the first place we would look for it.
Stop right there, just ask you just so I could follow along. So I could see that happening, and it probably happens every year. So let's just say that happened and 5 teachers left making, I don't know, make up a number, and you hired 5 making a lot less. You got 5 times whatever that number is, so you have some breakage, as you say. Does that manifest itself in a budget as a line item that says like a revenue item, or is it just
No.
your expense went down, so therefore your salary line is now decreased? So by hiring other people back into that salary line, you're just refilling that line back up? Is that how you would kind of handle it?
So if I have a line account for teachers, it's $500,000 for those teachers, X amount retire, so now my appropriation of what I'm actually going to spend is only $400,000.
Right.
So there's $100,000 that is appropriated for that line that we're ultimately not going to end up spending. So that is available to be reappropriated to another account to where, and maybe we're hiring an extra teacher in that account, or if it belongs in a different account, then we would transfer funds to that account, specific account. And that's, like, case in point would be, these were 2 kindergarten classrooms. That's a separate account. We only have 1 staff member for at each of those schools, correct, Central School there was 4 budgeted, and we had to add a 5th. West Belmar, there was only 1 kindergarten teacher, and we ended up hiring a 2nd for that account.
And let me just add to that. That's why I think it's important when we're having discussion around class size and where are those red zones that we might have that tipping point that we talked about last week, so that they're not unbudgeted positions, potentially that, 3-4 students come in and then we're really there and we didn't budget for that position. And then the other question that you asked, Joe, which is a really good question, the instructional para piece, that is the nature of the budget beast, right? With regard to special ed, students being evaluated, we really have no idea. Typically, districts try to stay, the state average is about 15% of students. That's your classification rate. So, we might be a little higher than that, but that's an ongoing organic number.
So with regards to, because the one thing I'm concerned about is the health of our reserve funds. And this kind of ties into the conversation because some of the money that's going to pay for these unbudgeted items are going to be expended during the year and not be left over at the end of the year, and therefore we're not able to replenish those funds from the drawdown we make in the beginning of the year to fund that line item for that year. So this is, hopefully everybody's following along there. So with regards to the school safety officers, I'm not picking on them. I just want to use an example because it kind of flashed on me when I was looking through this. It looks like we've done emergency reserve drawdowns every year. Does that go towards their salary?
No. The only drawdown on emergency reserve was for the health benefits line account.
So that $695 that was in the budget from last year was for a
Health
true
benefits.
health benefits, okay. So,
That offset the increase in health benefits.
okay, and our maintenance reserve drawdown, I was just going through the resolution here. It's $250, I believe, or $500 total?
Well, it's a $500,000 withdrawal from from the maintenance reserve, but it's a $250,000 drawdown. So, so at the end of the year, we'll have balances remaining at the end of the year. So we refer to as budgeted fund balance, where we take what balances are remaining and we fund next year's budget with that. The preference is to move that funding through the reserve account. So I'll move funds into the maintenance reserve, into the capital reserve, and then we'll draw them out and fund this, the 2021 budget. With regard to maintenance reserve, you can only fund you can only withdraw from your reserve account, whether it be a drawdown or just pass through, the amount that you have in your maintenance reserve. So our maintenance, not our maintenance reserve, but in our maintenance budget, our required maintenance budget. So we have about $524,000 in our maintenance budget, which, we can't draw more than $524,000 out of our maintenance reserve because we don't have the appropriation in maintenance. So, and we had already discussed in balancing the budget, not using any other revenue source with regard to tax levy, that we would fund this budget with the $250,000 drawdown. So, so I was permitted to have about $500,000 come from the maintenance reserve. So I'm moving $250 through it and drawing down $250 to fund the budget. Otherwise, if we weren't drawing down, then I would move $500,000 into the maintenance reserve and then back out of it as part of budgeted fund balance. But, that's been a revenue source for the last couple of years that we're drawing down on our reserve accounts, which I believe at this stage is okay because we have been back funding them. And with the idea of, I'd love to get to a point where we move away from that and we're funding, our annual costs on an annual basis with, our current expenses are being funded by our annual renewing revenue. But, we always come back to we're going to be going for a referendum or anticipation of a referendum that, perhaps that approach would be better visited once we get through the referendum process.
Well, so what I'm saying is the only way to replenish those reserve accounts at this point would be to go to the cap, because you're going to have to go to that 2% and try to open up as many funds at the end of the year to try to replenish that. And the reason I'm asking is because if we do go through a referendum and there are certain things that, say for instance, don't pass, that we still need to get done anyway, it's going to have to come out of capital reserve. So whether it's through the referendum process or capital reserve process, or capital reserve drawdown process, again, my concern is that the health of those reserve funds aren't going to support the needs of what's actually going to be coming in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. So that's on the capital reserve side. On the maintenance reserve side, we're doing 500 because the line item on the 261 accounts is 524,000, I think you said?
Yes.
When I was going through the budget, I noticed that within your 262 accounts, there's a lot of expenses that really should be more towards the 261 accounts. What was our balance? Do you remember what our balance was for at the end of, beginning of this year in the maintenance reserve?
The balance from last year?
Well, what is our current balance right now in the maintenance reserve account?
I would say it's remaining.
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the report.
Okay, I don't have
Because
it from-
we would have appropriated, the original appropriation would have been about the same. So we're about halfway through the stage, and I'd say we're probably 80% through that required maintenance.
So we're maintaining that $500,000 balance, give or take, year over year?
Not to return to the maintenance reserve, but just as our annual expenses for required maintenance.
Okay, let me simplify the question a little. What we have coming out is basically what we have going in at the end of the year.
Into the reserve account?
Into the reserve account, yes, I'm sorry.
Not from maintenance reserve. We're replenishing the maintenance reserve from balances in other accounts. If
Yes. Yes.
We replenish the maintenance reserve with whatever's left from the maintenance accounts, but we're not replenishing back what we took out. No.
So there's enough at the end of the year to replenish whatever we've pulled out. So we have a rotating buffer, per se,
We
built
have.
into the budget.
And, and the contributing factors to that are not having a settled contract when we're developing a budget and dealing with some round numbers on those type of projections. And then with regard to the, each year it's a variable, but when I look at the current school year and how we've been trending with our health benefits line account, we're going to have anticipated funds in that account to replenish the reserve accounts, whether it be maintenance reserve, the emergency reserve, capital reserve. 'Cause all
At the
those-
end of this year.
At the end of this year.
So you're confident enough, because I know I've learned this through my years of doing you never ask a BA what the amount of money that's going to be left at the end of the year is before you get to the end of the year. But you're confident there's going to be enough to go back into it at the end of the year, at least at this point in.
I qualify by saying, depending that if the second half of the year with regard to, our health benefits, if our monthly claims trend the same as they have for the first 6-7 months, then we should be fine. The other contributing factor to this budget is this was a settled contract. So the amount of money we budgeted for this year was actual salaries. For the largest part being the WTEA. So, we didn't have built-in breakage or, anticipated salaries that did not get expensed. What happens this is, I guess, the second year of the WTEA contract, you settle on a 3-year contract, and there's a percentage, and everyone, the employees are on the guide, and the year prior to you actually entering into that last contract, or the first year of the contract, is when you establish the scattergram. So, here's all your employees, this is what they make. So, that's a year before the contract even goes into effect. None of those employees change all through negotiations. Then what happens is you actually have to implement the contract, collective bargaining agreement. In that first year, the staff is different. In the second year, the staff could be considerably different. And the projections in the 3-year salary guidance, we said, hey, we settled at 2%, 2%, or 3%, 3%. Depending on where the new staff are on the guide, their jump may not be the same as what it was based on the individuals that were included on the settled guide. So, at that time, it averaged out to be 2 or 3% because, people were at the top of the guide, and people at the top of the guide are getting either 0 or 1%. And we're replacing them with people.
It's 2 or 3% on the total base.
Yeah, on the total base.
Then you distribute.
So you hire somebody in step 8. Well, step 8 to step 9 is actually a 5 or 6%. So, like when you go through the salary accounts in the budget projection report, and you start looking at the percentage increases, those are people. Without the proposed additional staff, I mean, the percentages vary. From 2% to 5%, 8%, so, and that's just the same staff rolling from year to year. So that's, at the end of this year, we don't anticipate having excess balances in our salary accounts. The other two, overtime is not as, variable, but substitutes. We budget hundreds of thousands of dollars for substitutes each year, So, some years it's better than others. So that's where you generate the balances at the end of the year that we've historically, aside from the 2% that we're able to put, that we're able to maintain, and recall the audit, at the end of last year, we didn't maintain 2% at the end of the year. So our remaining balance, once the audit was complete, was not at 2%, it was below 2%. And that's because we established certain dollar amounts going into the reserve accounts.
How much of that unbudgeted funds at the end of the year, or is there a cap on what we can, because we can use it for reserve accounts, we can use it for tax relief too, can't we?
If it wouldn't be tax relief in the next year, it would be tax relief in the subsequent year. So if you didn't put it into a reserve account, at the end of the year, whether it be at budget time or then again at the June meeting, then it rolls over as surplus, and you're allowed up to 2%. Any funds, any balances in excess of that 2% would become designated fund balance, and you have to use it as a revenue in the subsequent budget. So it would be in the next budget cycle. You couldn't use it in that budget. It's already complete. But again, in the board, I'm more than happy to discuss it each year, whether the philosophy is to just let that occur or to have it go into reserve accounts, and the pros and cons. The benefit of reserve accounts is you have control, and it doesn't all have to be used in the subsequent year, where if you allow it to go to audited excess surplus, it has to be used as a revenue in the following year. But in a reserve, you can phase it over multiple years. And that has always been the direction of the board, is that we put what funds we can into the reserve accounts, with the idea that we use those funds to supplement the revenues in the budgets in future years.
Hey, Brian, the
Thank you.
499 on CapEx that we're proposing, are you saying based on what you just said with projected, if everything goes smoothly, reserve money and stuff, that we could increase that out of the capital reserve comfortably? Is that something that you would agree to, or not agree to?
Yes, and the 499 isn't funded by the capital reserve, and because only a portion of the capital expenditures can be funded by the capital reserve, and that would be the facility improvements, which is about half of that.
So if we wanted to increase capital expenditures, it has to come out of operating funds?
No, it depends half of that is equipment. So the portions of that 499 that is equipment, like there's a technology upgrade, a maintenance vehicle, those come from the current expense or current revenues. The facility improvements, design and construction, that can be funded by the capital reserve. So any other projects that we want to put into capital, we can fund that by capital reserve. And it would be a discussion on what projects and how
Right.
much.
So hypothetically, we said $500,000, right?
Yes,
That could come out of the reserves without threatening the reserves? Is that what you're saying?
correct.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, it depends what the
Well,
balance
the end of the
is. I
year
think we were-
determination, but based on what he said, it's
Yes.
projecting to be a good number. Is that what I'm hearing?
yes.
Okay.
So-
I just want to make sure I understand that there
Well-
might be some money available to
It would-
increase
so-
that from the reserve.
To build off of that question, it would be, so we get to the end of the year, we see a need for a capital project. We've already budgeted, though, for the following year, and we get to the end of this year, we drop funds in the capital reserve. Would that be available in the next year, or would you have to wait till the following year after that?
You-
So 2021, 2022, the next one.
As part of the budget cycle,
Yeah.
you would wait till the 21, 22 and include it in the budget. However, if we're funding it solely from capital reserve drawdown, we could go to the Department of Education, and ask for approval for, if it's a project that is approved by the Department of Ed, we would be able to fund it from our capital reserve in the 2021 year.
But that would be contingent on it being in our LRFP,
Yes,
that we still have to continue to work on.
correct. And that could be as simple as an amendment to the LRFP for the project.
All right, one last one from me, Brian. So what Russell just said, and I think you were talking to Adam about possibility of, if things go right, you'll have money left over from the budget for health benefits that may not be used, right? I thought that the budget fund balance from your general fund revenue, that money, this 1,076,076, I thought that's kind of what you projected that to be. So you're saying that there could be an additional revenue from something else?
Yeah, not revenue, but
Well, okay.
balances left over. yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you would, right. So this 1,076,076, this budget fund balance, what makes that up? Is that
All the
all the
accounts.
other accounts?
Yeah, including the health benefits.
Okay, so you've already factored that in, though?
Yes,
Okay, so when Russell is saying from this budget that you're putting together, you're already factoring in the 1,076,076 coming in as leftover from this year's budget that we didn't spend.
correct.
So that will come in. And with that, we're only going to be able to spend the $499 on the capital expenditures. I think what he was trying to get at, because I've had a conversation with him, was that your take that additional money would be coming in from the healthcare, that would come in and change this number and allow this number to go up. Like, but you're saying this 1,076 captures what you already think is going to be the totality of all the non-spent money. It's not 1,076 and whatever the healthcare is going to be. It's not addition to, it's inclusive of.
Remember what Adam said earlier, don't have to be how much is going to be left at the end of the year?
And I know this is a best guess estimate. I understand that. I'm not, we know that something could pop up and changes all that, but.
To address it, at this stage, in constructing the budget, we're comfortable that, and one, it's partly comfortable, it's also what we have done. So we almost, that's a recurring revenue. Just like we rely on taxes, we rely on state aid, we rely on those balances at the end of the year to be rolled over. So we're comfortable that the budget can be funded with that as a revenue source. The understanding with regard to the capital reserve, the capital expenditures, or the capital budget, the 490, I would say that the 1 million you're talking about in budgeted fund balance, that's only funding half of that 499, the capital equipment, as well as everything else that's in the current expense budget. The other part of the capital expenditure, which is the facility improvement projects, which is 250, is funded from the capital reserve drawdown. As far as having the ability to add to that, add to the facility improvement, say $500,000, I'm comfortable that we'd be able to do that because, one, we can draw down from our existing balances in our capital reserve with the idea that we would probably in June be funding that additionally. Because, one, we're not funding our emergency reserve at the end. Actually, let me correct that. We'll be funding that, a portion of it, because we weren't able to fully fund it last year. But we're not using any of it as part of this budget. So the emergency reserve, we're only funding the balance that is still allowable.
I think I understand, and I was just Russell, you stepped out. I think I was just getting Brian to clarify that the $1 million that he has projected as being unspent money this year, that he has in the budget as a revenue source, right, rolling the money over, that money is there, and then that includes the $499 as an expense. It's not like we're going to get additional money from the health savings costs to add on, so that would be like, oh, we got another 500 here, I can spend another 500 here. That's what I thought he was asking, and I wanted to make sure that that's not the case. This is the total amount of money inclusive. That's really my question. And I know you kind of went round and round, but it's kind of a simple question. At the end of the year, on June 30th, when you shut the books, you anticipate having $1,076,000 left over that you can roll into the next year's budget.
Yes.
Right. No additional money from anywhere else, no money.
For the purpose of rolling into next year's budget, what I will say is, we still have the remaining portion of the year. We have some unknowns with regard to health, but so there could be additional balances in excess of that million come June.
And it could be less than this based on other factors that maybe bring it down. I get it. This is a best guess.
Kind of asking it, if a snapshot we're taking now.
Yes, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm just saying it's not going to be like, oh, you got this 176. No, by the way, wait, we have a $500,000 over here in his health benefits that I'm projecting that we're not going to use, which is I think what Russell was trying to say. Hey, are you anticipating the health benefits being not spent, and we're going to give another 100,000, and you're going to come back and say, oh, well, this is 1.5, not 1 million.
But
and that's
if
what
there are additional funds remaining, they will be passed by resolution into the reserve account.
So if it comes in under that $1,076,000, and we approve the budget, as is like this, and there's a shortfall on the revenue side, where does that money come from?
It'll come from the fact that we don't have at the end of next year, when we do our audit, our allowable 2% surplus, it'll be drawn down from there.
Okay, so it's not like we'll have to increase the tax levy or cut our expenses. There is,
We do have the ability during the school year to revise the budget, and that would be done by board resolution, but if the difference is because of the budgeted fund balance, that's why we have the allowable 2% surplus there on our balance sheet, that we would utilize that to make up the difference.
That's clear as mud.
So at this stage, we have, you know, the tentative budget is somewhat set. It's at the 2%. We discussed last week that we would return with, you know, are we comfortable at 2%? Do we want 2% with bank cap? Do we want less than 2%? I want to initially say I'd be hesitant to go to above the 2% utilizing the bank cap. We can revisit that as we, you know, move between the tentative budget and the final budget. If we want to discuss further the long-range facility plan, what projects we may want to include, and whether we want to fund them strictly from a capital reserve, or if we want to utilize some of the bank cap based on, you know, the tax rate that we're looking at as being $15 at 2%. You know, with the consideration for ensuring that we do have the ability to fund our capital reserves so that we can get the needs addressed over the course of the next few years. If you're asking for my recommendation at this point, that we would proceed with it currently at 2%, but I'm open for discussion.
And so we need to approve next week a budget that goes temporarily, that's balanced, right? And if it says 2% or it says 0%, it says 1%, the week later, the week after that, whenever we get to April 26th, it can look completely different without any hiccups, requirements, litigation, holdups, or anything. If that's what we decided to do, I'm not recommending we will, but I just want to make sure we have full license to take it and throw it upside down if we choose to in the next 5 weeks.
Yes, it still needs to be approved by the Department of Education. So when we submit the tentative budget, we obtain approval for that and permission to advertise that budget. The Board of Education has the ability to change it, revise it, blow it up, and approve a different budget at the public hearing or after the public hearing, but then that has to be, the budget that I submitted to the Department of Education has to be revised and resubmitted and ultimately approved.
Sure.
Although the factors that, you know, with regard to what the board would consider, and if it's, hey, we want to use bank cap, or we want to change the, you know, the tax levy to be 0 or 1%, that's not going to affect the approval by the Department of Education. So, but I just want to say, it still has to be approved.
Mr. President?
Mr. Krupa.
Yes. So we're looking at a lot of numbers, and I appreciate that that's important to do, but I come from a different way of having done some of this, and I don't know, maybe we're not there yet, but one of the ways looking at this, which is kind of got a double plus, if you will, which is, one, the board understands better where the money is going, and two, the public understands where the money's going. And that way that I was just talking about is where by building or by project line, you'll see what some of the things are that the budget, not the normal everyday stuff, but the things that we're looking at as pluses of this budget, if you will. So one I can point out right now is the staffing, but I'm sure there's others, like purchase of textbooks or change of programs, and they're on a slide that everybody sees, and it gives more meaning and purpose to what we're doing. And as I said, it's almost celebratory, because at this time, I don't know if I'm understanding your request that we want you to develop the budget with 2%, or that everything that's already been proposed is going to be fine with whatever increase there is, whether it's 0, 1, or 2. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would only say that currently as it stands, it's at 2%. So if we're going to revise that and go to a lower percentage, then we have to revisit it, either come up with a different revenue or we're going to have to address appropriations.
Okay, so that emboldens me even more to asking what I'm asking, which is that I would like to see that representation. And as I said, it's slides of what's going to happen with the passage of this budget, because that makes people want to buy in. And numbers are great. Like I said, this is very important work, and we're learning, especially listening to all the questions. But there's another side to this, which really builds support.
Well, the public hearing on April 28th will be a PowerPoint presentation of the budget. It'll have all that. And then any budget workshops prior to that we want to have as a presentation, that will be provided. But in order to make that meaningful, I'm just trying to find the baseline, like, where are we?
Right. But you
as
said
far
it
as the
was developed, I'm sorry, but you said it was developed with the 2%. So if that's the case, I would like to see what those pluses of this budget are.
Okay.
Because then I can get behind it more, as will the public, even though it's not a voted on budget unless we go above. But that's important to do, because this is gobbledygook. It's numbers. And, people might not like that I said that, but I'm speaking my truth. And that is that we need to see what it is besides teaching and learning, what this budget is going to actually provide in the schools. And I don't want a long list. I want the building, and, there's going to be improvements to the lab. There's going to be improvements to the field, or we're getting a new bus. That's the kind of thing that I'm used to seeing. So, and I would love for the public to see that too, because they deserve that.
And Mr. Krupa, just so you know, that is part of a presentation that's usually given by the superintendent. It does have
Go there.
those things in it. Just touching on this particular budget, a couple of things that we've been thrown around the last couple of weeks, and I know me and Mr. Sanfilippo have discussed it. Security. One thing we noticed back to school night, and I know some of the people here were part of the board back then, but our RAP program in the morning, we have an hour where we don't have security and there's students. So like to see a way we restructure our security where we can have them come in an extra hour earlier and cover that time. So whenever there's a student in the building, we have coverage there. I think that's important. And something else I think we need to look at is our custodial numbers. I think we are understaffed. That's certainly something I picked up on the back-to-school nights, and certainly something that I've been hearing now that we've talking about additional cleaning and those needs. So I think that's something we need to also take a look at with this budget.
So, Mr. President?
Yes.
So what I'm asking is something which maybe is projected to be done, but without having the experience working with this board, I am asking for that, because we should see that, and it doesn't mean that that's the final product, but if we have a budget built with 2%, I'd like to see some of that besides the numbers. You just gave a great example of what a bullet point could be on there, that we're going to have more security.
But that would mean a higher than 2%, because right now,
Not necessarily.
well, that would mean that we have to cut something else.
What I'm saying is that,
Well, if you're going to ask somebody to come in an hour earlier, you're going to have to pay them more money, right?
Well, but that would be funded through the RAP program. So the RAP program is like our food service. It's an enterprise account, and it has to fund everything that's associated with that program. So if we have a lobby security officer there for that hour, their salary should be paid out of that RAP.
Yeah, absolutely. But
So-
you're also a custodian.
Right.
Again, custodians. I guess, Andy, I'm with you. I understand what you're saying, and I think, Brian, gave us a high level. He gave us these books that literally have every line in it. Now, I know you're not going to go through that, okay? And I would have loved to do that. I brought that up a couple of meetings ago, and I really wanted to do that, but I didn't really get an appetite from a lot of other people that thinking that was a good idea. I pushed back and said if some of the teachers wanted, although Miss Stites, I shouldn't say that, Miss Stites has gone above and beyond what I would have done. But I said a couple of meetings ago that, if we're going to add all these things, that we should be going back and asking the principals maybe to look at their budget and asking each elementary school teacher to say, can you find us, 20 grand somewhere in your budget on your building? And maybe the intermediate and high school, maybe they could find us 25 to help offset all the new teachers that we're going to hire for them, just to give us a little bit more wiggle room so that we could hire an extra couple of custodians. Or do some of these other things, or maybe raise $100,000 to the capital reserve budget, the maintenance, the maintenance budget that we're looking to do, capital expenditure budget that Russell and Adam were talking about, to do something like that. Because, like I said, we get this budget, I start going through it, your eyes glaze over, and that's when Brian, I think, explained to me that the budget was already kind of half baked in because the principals had already gone through it, put in all their requests, and basically gave them the numbers already. And he used all that to prepare the sheet that we're looking at. So when Andy says, I'd like to see what it is, well, right on the sheet gives you $48 million for salaries, $13 million for benefits, $2.7 million for a thing. It leaves us $10 million that we can spend, quote unquote, money on. Now, I think the only thing Brian could do is take that $10.2 million and basically blow that up and put more lines on it, But I don't know.
I hear you, Joe, but I think that's more of what we're seeing, the numbers. And we need a face to this. And this is something that I'm familiar with having seen in other districts. And I think that will allow us to do some of the things that you just said could be possible, where we need help with cuts or whatever. But first, we need a face to the 2% that was developed. The numbers, yes, they're there, but they don't give us the full picture in terms of what the budget is supporting. Other than, like I said, we know it's to teaching salaries, we know it's for health benefits, but what are the things, like a lab that has been asked to be upgraded this year? And that was hypothetical, but that's what I'm asking for. And maybe, as was alleged, the superintendent would have helped with that. But principals, as you said, the supervisors, they all contribute to that. It's just a snapshot that gives a face to what we're looking at. That's what I'm asking for.
I have a
don't know if that
question.
makes sense.
And just so clarification, and that happens over the course of the next month as we
Okay.
approach the public hearing.
Where are teachers given an allowance based upon, like, if you're a classroom teacher, you have this much to spend, if you're an in-class support teacher, you have this much to spend, or does the budget come from the building principal?
The classroom teachers do have a small stipend that they spend for classroom supplies, for consumable supplies.
Is that like curriculum materials, or is it just for like
Typically more classroom
folders
supplies, and the
and
curricular materials are handled in the 610 and the 640 account in the building-based budgets that the principals put forth.
Okay.
I would recommend to everybody, if you go onto the district website and go into the little search bar, just type in budget, and it'll bring up past year budgets, and you can go into last year's budget and click on, I believe it's called the user-friendly one, and it'll list different things that go into the budget. So take a look at that format, and if there's other things you'd like to see, certainly email Dr. Gleason and ask her, if that can, and Brian, if those, any new ideas could be incorporated into that document to try to really encompass everything that everybody's talking about. Because I think that document kind of does it somewhat, but maybe there's other things you want to say.
Just with regard to the user-friendly budget, that's I guess a template from the Department of Education, we can't change that. That is generated through the DOE. However, we do have the PowerPoint presentations
That's what
that
I'm
we
talking about. I'm
provide
sorry.
for the budget that you can look
Yes.
at. Now, we would follow suit with what would be presented with this budget. I mean, but at this stage, it's kind of like,
It's,
what are the priorities that we're looking to include in the budget?
It was-
Is it the tax levy? Is it the strategic plan? Is it facility improvement? Is it negotiations, which we've kind of, over the last couple of weeks, honed in on, and I haven't heard much variation from the 2%, although there's been some discussion. And again, that can, change or be revised or be further discussed over the course of the next month leading up to the public hearing, in conjunction with why we would use bank cap, or on what basis we would be able to reduce the tax levy below 2%.
Hey, Brian, the recommendation that Ralph made to have security the first hour of the wrap account, I think is important to consider. The wrap account in this general fund?
No.
no.
Right, so it's a wash in terms of what you're saying. If it's gonna cost us another 20 grand, people are gonna pay the 20 grand to cost it out. So it's
Right.
not affecting this budget.
Absolutely. And
correct?
was,
Correct.
that, right,
Okay.
and that was the other
Thank
thing I
you.
was going to ask, because we didn't get an update on the RAP program tonight. I didn't know if,
I actually have.
oh, you
one.
have,
I do
okay.
have, yep.
So we could touch base on that in a second, but the thing I misspoke, it's the budget presentation, and I pulled up the one from 5/2/1917, or 1917, 2017, I'm sorry. So that one has, graphs and different things in it. So just take a look at any one of those years and see if the information in there is something that you like, or you want to see something else, because this would be the time that we could get it put together, and, maybe we could have a couple different versions of it to see. And just in regards to, the question Brian's been asking about the 2% or not 2%, I'm, compared to, and I asked it before, so last year, if we didn't have the increase in the rateable base, it would have been, what was that number again, at 2%, Brian?
About a little over $60.
Okay, so it's a considerable difference, because, I mean, a $15 annual increase wouldn't even have been on the table pretty much, right? Would that have been like a 0.5% increase to get something like that? For last year?
Yes.
No, I'm talking about last year. Right, no, I don't have last year's.
No, not last year's, the first version of that.
No, that wasn't based on,
No,
it's
no.
still based on
Ralph-
the current rate of.
Ralph, what you're saying, if I'm understanding, is last year, if you,
It was the tax levy.
a 1% tax levy last year basically was a $60.
No, I'm sorry, a 2% would have been
2% was
60.
$60, so 1% was 30,
Right,
right? So to get a 15, it would have been the equivalent of
maybe,
a 0.5%.
right.
And so you're saying that this year you can raise the tax levy by 2%, and still the homeowner would still pay the same increases they did last year if they had a 0.5%. Because of
Exactly,
the larger tax base in the town,
yes.
even though we're raising taxes theoretically on this budget, if we decided to go this way, 2%, the actual out-of-pocket to the taxpayer would feel like a 0.5, but because of all the other addition, taxable rateables in the town.
You were reading my mind, thank you.
Hey, Brian, can I ask the follow-up question? I was going to ask you about the wrap and Ralph's other comment about maintenance staff, which is also valid and something that, if there is a need, or maybe it's just Ralph's opinion, I don't know, but more maintenance staff and security for wrap seem to be simple, budgetary additions. I'm just curious, like, why they didn't come through the the wrap wouldn't come through the budget in this version. That's the first I've heard of that. And the custodial staff, if we need more, is that just one man's opinion, or is that legitimate? And how come that wasn't put in the budget if it is necessary? Why is that coming from a board member as a recommendation versus bubbling up from the staff saying, we're cleaning things 13 times a day now, the budget process is here, I need a couple extra guys. We have, it looked like a lot of overtime in maintenance. Is that because of turnover or people not showing up? I don't know. Like, I'm concerned that if that's a need, how come it didn't come up through the budget process? Or is it not a need and it's just Ralph's opinion, which maybe it is, I don't know.
Well, before Brian answers, mine is based on conversations with actual employees in the
Okay.
buildings.
No, I
So-
don't think it's your opinion, I'm
Yeah.
just saying,
So-
how come it's not coming through the
No,
process?
because I mean, look, I'm not into necessarily spending money we don't have to, but I also have a concern that we have I believe, one of the schools where we have one custodian on at times, and my fear is if someone gets hurt, do they lay there until the next morning if they get hurt and they can't get up? So I don't think any employee should be in a building by themselves. And certainly our buildings are big enough where we need the staff. I mean, and especially now, we're talking about doing additional cleaning where certain things are kind of maybe getting pushed aside a little bit, where maybe you're not sweeping out every corner and doing the things that you would normally do because there's more important things to do. But
I'm not against it,
Yeah.
I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. I'm not
No,
against the looking at the hiring of more maintenance staff. I'm just wondering how come that process
Can-
is not coming up from down below?
Can I interject here? Because there are metrics to measure the amount of square footage per person. So there is, it's a data-driven process. But another, going on the data-driven process type thing, there is another metric and another measurement that we don't talk about, and that is, what is our district comparative to other districts in spending on each one of these different indicators? And I hate to say this because this is something I've been looking at for a while, even before I was on the board. And if you go on the state's website, the Taxpayer's Guide to Education Spending, they take a look at all of our metrics and they compare us to all the other districts of comparable size within the state. And I'll give you an example of that indicator, salaries and benefits for operations and maintenance of plant. We are ranked 69th out of 75 districts of comparable size. That's up to like 3,500 students in the state. A lot of our metrics, we're spending a lot of money to get done, and we're ranked near the bottom on the amount of money we're spending to achieve these things. So to Andy's point, we need to see what we're getting for the money that we're spending. Part of this is because our district enrollment has contracted so quickly, and it kind of takes time to work out, but we also need to start justifying if we're going to go to a 2%. And I mean, I talk about the reserve accounts, but just in general, going to a 2% with a decline in enrollment, with the additional services that are needed, with doing improvements to the buildings that are needed that may have been deferred for some time, we need to be conscious that the amount of money we're spending per student to get these things done is near the bottom in almost every category. So let's be conscious of that, please.
For clarification, when you look at the ranking, it's because of the amount of money we spend per pupil compared to all the other districts in the support service or operations and maintenance. I'm not sure the source of who's saying that we're understaffed in the custodial department. As part of the submission of the budget to the Department of Education and as part of CUSAC and our annual review, one of the checks they have is that our staffing is based on, it's data-driven. It's and what they project is that you have one custodian for every 17,500 square feet of building space. We're in excess of that. So we have more custodians, or I would say we're below that on a square footage basis per custodian. So we actually, based on the state standard, we have more custodians than we should. And part of the justification for that, because I've had to justify it or provide the rationale in the Department of Education's review, is that, and it was a number of years ago, and I'm going to at least 10 to 12, that there was a second question that was included in the budget, because when the district looked to outsource custodial services, it ended up discussing that it would not be outsourced, and we added approximately 6 custodians as a second question. That second question passed. So, what was included in the budget was the amount that we were supposed to have per state guidelines. We added an additional 6 as a second question, which was permissible, and it was approved. So anytime it's questioned by the Department of Education, I say, hey, we've gone to the voters. They approved the additional custodial staff. With regard to staffing shortages, one of the difficulties, which is not, alone to the custodial department, is filling the absenteeism. So, vacation, sick, personal, we only have 2 custodians. We budget about $25,000 in substitute custodians. If we want to address the the shortage in staff due to I don't want to say attendance in a negative way, because people get sick and people are entitled to the vacation time that they earn, but that's where we end up having the shortage, and we want to increase the dollar amount, because one of the difficulties with having a substitute custodian is having somebody who's a full-time substitute custodian. Maybe you can get somebody who's more reliable if you're going to guarantee that they work 5 days a week. And maybe that's something we can look to pursue further, is in increasing the number of custodians. And we use that as a stepping stone to getting a permanent job in the district. Typically, we don't hire anybody unless they've served as a substitute custodian, and it's an opportunity to evaluate them. With regard to staff working alone in the building, you have West Belmar School. It's a 40-something thousand square foot building. There's 2 custodians. If one is absent, we only have 1 custodian there. But aside from reassigning staff, which then makes those buildings short, aside from West Belmar School, and that would be the only building where you typically could have 1 person, but we have 1 person who does all the outbuildings. They do the primary school. They do the business office. They do the superintendent's office, technology, operations, and transportation. They do it from 3 to 11 o'clock at night, 1 person bouncing from building to building. So, we have 2 situations where we have somebody working alone, and it's, we could add these additional positions. It would not be in the custodial department. If we want to, propose additional staff, I'd like to see them in the maintenance department. But, when we look at the positions that we're identifying to include in the budget, what ends up happening each year, it could be proposed, but maintenance is going to fall off, it's going to come to the bottom of the priority list when we're looking to include staffing. So,
Mr. President?
Yes.
And I think it's fair to revisit this, with the eyes of the new supervisor that we have. He's not been here that long. It takes time to get familiar, although there are things that remain the same. And I don't know how we got onto custodians, but with regards to the things that both you and Adam shared, which are factual, and I can't argue them, I can't. One thing, though, that strikes me, especially since we did the walkthroughs, is that no matter the enrollment, the buildings remain the same size. The needs of the buildings change as they age, and the breakdowns. I can say this without meaning any derogatory aspect to it at all. I've not seen anybody really outside the buildings. Like, I would go to the Neptune High School often, and I see people on other locations that are outside doing some of the things which, a robust staff would be able to do in terms of maintaining the facilities overall. It may not do anything about the breakdown of the facilities, but these are issues that we know exist. And
well,
I don't know, I like what you're proposing in terms of exploring this a little bit further, and it is difficult to get subs in the custodian world for sure. Part-time, that's another aspect, but I don't know what the market is for that in this area. I don't know if additional supervision would help You know, this is all stuff that has to be fleshed out with a more, not experience, but somebody who's been here a little bit longer and allowing Mr. Moretta to do that.
Yep, I agree.
Just as an FYI, Russ, too, so some of those things in terms of the security for the RAP program, it wasn't necessarily an extension of hours because there's an overlap. There's kind of a changing of the guard there. And so there was, my understanding was there was sufficient overlap where the person could come in and then be able to service the RAP program and still be able to, you know, be outside for recess and, you know, do those other things when you have the 2 security guards in the building. And this is just, again, for the elementary schools too, right? So that was just another point. So it might not necessarily be extending hours or assigning dollars over from the RAP program for it, just taking a look at it and seeing if, you know, if that can be shifted a little bit.
Only that we're comfortable. Thank you. Comfortable where we currently are. I'm going to proceed with the resolution that was proposed. As I continue to work on the Department of Education, you know, budget and with regard to their specifics and requirements, there could be changes internally within the budget. I wouldn't be changing the bottom line at this point. So the budget projection report that I provided, or budget details, you know, may be revised, and I would look to provide that, you know, I would hope prior to the budget, but that they may come subsequent to it. But just knowing that the big picture items as far as the, where the revenues are, currently are at, and what the appropriations are from a total on the current expense as well as the capital budget, you know, and their totals won't change, but the individual line items may. So.
Okay. Dr. Gleason, could you, the RAP program?
Yes, I apologize. I should have included this under enterprise. This is the March update from RAP. $46,924.76 was invoiced in February. Of that amount, $45,843.76 was tuition, $100 was registration, $890 were drop-in fees, and $91 were late pickup fees. The program is scheduled to provide coverage for early release days for parent-teacher conferences on March 25th and 26th. The 2020-21 registration is currently being set up and is expected to open on time on July 1st. There are a couple recommendations to consider from the RAP program. For the new school year, the board, it's recommended that there's a discussion around providing a sibling discount for families that bring more than one child. The preliminary recommendation is a 10% sibling discount for the first child and a 15% discount for additional children. We currently do not offer a sibling discount in the aftercare or before care program. There's also a preliminary recommendation to offer a drop-in program for parents that need childcare on an emergency basis, so they would call that day and potentially need drop-in. The rates would be the same as the drop-in rates for registered participants. The only condition would be that families would be required to provide 24-hour notice if possible, so that they can ensure, first of all, that these are students who are not normally registered, so that they would have appropriate contact information, and proper staffing, appropriate staffing. The last update from RAP is that following the district guidance, correspondence was sent to the families in aftercare RAP program regarding coronavirus also, and procedures are being put in place there with regard to hygiene, as well as additional cleaning by the RAP employees of the supplies and equipment that they're using, that they're disinfected twice per week. And one other recommendation that typically if a student is showing signs of illness or just saying they're not feeling well, that a parent is called and there's a discussion, should the child be picked up, depending on what time the parent normally comes. There might be a little bit of leeway there. With the current situation, parents are being expressly told that they have to come and the child must be picked up immediately if the child is exhibiting symptoms of illness.
Do you know how many students are enrolled right now?
I do not have that number.
Okay.
I'll get to that number, but I do not have that on this update from RAP.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody have any questions? Not on RAP? Questions on anything else?
So I have quite a few questions, and I'm not going to take up everybody's time with them here this evening, but I am going to be meeting. But just a couple of highlights of things that I have questions on going through the budget, not ranked in any particular order, but I did have questions about $85,000 in custodial overtime, $25,000 in custodial substitutes. I also had a question about, in terms of operation, our environmental compliance inspections and the environmental sampling and monitoring, as well as the asbestos, the abatement. I think this is monitoring $8,000 in the district. It's, do we have somebody in the district that has certification that could be doing this for us now? Is the new facilities manager, does he have the certs that he would be able to pick up any of this?
Yes. He has certain qualifications, although the monitoring, we would not ask him to do the monitoring, although he can do some of the supervision and actually some of the work. And he's looking to turnkey that with our staff, so that with regard to at least the asbestos operations and maintenance, as far as getting them trained. But we use an outside company to do the monitoring.
So I guess my question would be, if we know where the asbestos is and somebody's certified to monitor it, why would we pay somebody on the outside to do that as opposed, I'm just looking at, it's on page, it starts at 192, we're paying like $1,000. I'm not talking about the $15K for the abatement. I'm talking, I think this is for monitoring, $1,000 at each building.
Yeah, he was not, we're revisiting that now because Mr. Moretta does have the license as a HERA inspector.
And then as far as that environmental compliance, that's page 221. There's inspections for $6,000, and then there's sampling and monitoring for $5,000. Is he able to do any of that stuff?
Can I interject here? Because when it comes to environmental stuff, from a legal standpoint, a lot of times you don't want to do that in-house because you need a third-party verification.
Okay.
And it represents a conflict to do it in-house.
Okay.
From an equipment standpoint, we don't have specialized equipment to do, say, mercury testing on the floors. That's something we would have to rent. But even still, just from a, if you go to court, you want to have a third-party legal expert if there are any issues that's available.
Okay.
That's just for practice.
Gotcha, I appreciate that. And then I know we kind of touched base on the whole vaccines, the flu and the hepatitis B. I know that's a contracted issue right now, but going forward, just trying to look at if we're paying for, I'd be curious to know what the difference is of us bringing the vaccines in versus going through the healthcare that's there. Not trying to quote unquote take anything away from anybody. These are just questions for my layperson. And then I'm going to be touching base with Dr. Gleason on professional development travel, and then also with Mr. Smythe, just in that we're paying $75,000 a year total in terms of the district, Board of Ed travel, other travel, maintenance travel, and I understand that that somehow includes paying for some of the things that we attend as well, not just travel. But I'm curious to see how that stuff comes back and benefits the district, since we seem to be paying a lot of money toward it. I think I'll just stop right there for now.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Because you triggered something in my mind, Christine. Did we pay $29,000 a year for us to be part of the New Jersey School Boards Association? Is that what I saw?
Yes.
We don't have an out on that, right? We're like required to belong?
I almost want to defer to our attorney for that one.
I'm not sure if you're required.
I'm all for joining associations with value. $29,000 is quite a sum of money for 9 people. That's $3,000 a year. I mean, is that for our training? I mean, what's the justification for that? I'm curious. We don't have to go through it right now, but just a thought.
Well, there's a lot of lobbying that happens in Trenton on behalf of us. I think a portion of that goes to that. There are, there are things that we pay for.
Your mic.
Sorry. It is a lot of money. It is, but, there are some lobbying expenses that are paid for that. We have our county meetings. We do have some perks that we get as members that help us out. But I do agree, 29 is a lot.
I mean, there's some inclusion with regard to negotiations. They provide certain assistance, salary guide review as part of it. Part of it, that could be extra superintendent's evaluation and, the training for Board of Ed members. So, I mean, we can get the list.
Chris?
I was just going to say, the superintendent evaluation and then the board evaluations, they come in each year, and do that. I agree.
How much, Chris?
I agree. Is it negotiable?
Can I ask one
Tell
more?
them we'll give them
Well, I'm
5.
gonna, I just wanted the vaccine line item that you had brought up. Where was that? I want to make sure, because I caught on that too. I went through, but I don't have nearly as many, nearly as many Post-it notes as you do.
Was it, it's 6,000, 8,000? 6,600.
Mr. President,
yes.
is that because we,
Well, no, that's for our Hep B shots. That's a,
right, so we provide that as opposed to them going to
no,
their,
we're required to do that as a
Right.
matter of our
your OSHA?
well, not just
POSA.
collective, yeah,
Yes.
it's a POSH requirement
Yes.
for bloodborne pathogens for anybody that handles, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's,
The flu vaccine being provided is provision in the collective bargaining agreement with the WTEA.
That's the CBA then?
Yes.
Yes.
But I think the comparison to consider, because most think, well, you can go to Rite Aid or you can go somewhere and you can get it for free. However, we're self-insured, so it's not free. We will actually be paying that. Like if you had it's free to the employee or whoever belongs to Horizon Blue Cross, but what we're trying to track down is what is the actual cost to the district when someone does go to a Walgreens or a Rite Aid and gets that.
Right, because then, will I pay for it twice if that's a possibility? I don't know. What about a shared service agreement again with the health, the township health department?
The township doesn't have a health
They
department.
don't do that, okay.
We're part of the Freehold Regional Health Department, and they do, I forget how many towns in Monmouth County. We were part of another one, but we shifted over to Freehold, which has worked out much better for us, because they were actually at our meeting, and chances are, if it was the other one, they probably might not have been there. Anybody else? No? Brian, good? All right. Seeing none, at this time, we will go on to number 8, and that's recommended approval of the leave of absence for Ms. Cheryl Dyer, Superintendent of Schools, from March 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2020. Could I have a motion for that?
I'll make the
So
motion.
moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Smythe?
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Krupa?
Yes.
Ms. Mangan?
Yes.
Mr. Nasser?
yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites?
Yes.
Mr. Guards?
Yes.
Mr. Adnezio?
I will recuse myself because I have a family member that works in the district.
Duly noted.
And then number 9, could I have a motion for recommended approval of travel and professional development expenses for the 1920 school year?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Smythe?
Mr. Krupa?
Yes.
Ms. Mangan?
Yes.
Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites? Mr. Gartz?
Yes.
Mr. Hall? Mr. Adenizio?
Yes. Okay. Public comment time, please come up to the microphone and state your name.
Old business, new business.
Betsy Cross, I live in Wall Township. I think I might be the only person that's going to speak tonight. Anybody else going to speak? If I could have over 5 minutes, because I wrote down a number of items. Mr. Adenizio, President Adenizio.
The board wants everybody limited to 5 minutes.
But it's your decision, so you get to
I
decide.
take direction from the board. It's just not me.
Okay, we got a lot of people live streaming. Okay, duly noted. Ms. Gleason, could you post for the Beauty and the Beast? Could you send it out to the elementary schools too, since it is something that's gonna interest them? And then on the 28th, we have that class where they're gonna learn a dance and a song. So if you could send that out, that'd be great. A couple things I wanted to go over. $29,000 for that, the NJEA sounds outrageous. Could you try and find out if you could negotiate that lower? I think I've heard of other districts that pay less, so if you could find out if we could pay lower. You have the F&F to be discussed tonight. This is my 10th year at a budget meeting, 10th. And every year, it's the same thing. It's ridiculous. It goes on because it's all new people. Nobody knows what they're doing. And Mr. Garth, you've been good so far, but you have to say, we need a presentation that you can share with the public, because it's way too late to have it on the last day, and Mr. Adenizio is only going to give 5 minutes and rush everybody out of here, even though I've asked questions 3 meetings in a row now, and he never gets back to me. So that's what you have to do now. You're the chair of F&F. Ralph was the chair of F&F and did nothing when he was the chair for 6 years, doing the same exact thing he's doing now.
All right, Ms. Cross, you realize everything you're saying is a complete lie.
Okay.
So I just
So-
want you to know that.
You haven't had a presentation here. I've been here for 10 years now.
And there's been presentations
Do you have
every
approval
year.
for the trailers from the DOE? You didn't go over that tonight. Do you have approval for the trailers? If you could answer that tonight on the record. Do you have permits in from the municipality? I understand as of yesterday you did not. If you could go on the record tonight, do you have permits in, or are you going to do the work like you did before, put the trailers in before you have DOE approval, and then go out and finance the money, and you still can't produce the documents? So that's one of the documents that was due today for Mr. Smythe that he did not give. It is overdue, and the board lets him do it over and over and over again. Highlights of the 1920 budget, you need to tell him, you need to go over, this is what you budgeted, now we need to know what you spent. He still hasn't done it, and it's been 3 meetings. He needs to budget based on actual. To keep having him budget based on budget doesn't make any sense. That's why you're in this mess, and this is why you will never, ever pass a referendum. Ferrati, Vesic, and Freitech were the prior architects. Please look into suing them over what they did at the football field. Those are the same people that did the nonsense with the Central School trailers. Same exact people. Go back and look to sue them, okay? Because we're not going to pay it. What else? All the comments from the superintendent search are due tomorrow. Mr. Smythe asked for an extension. I don't think he needed it. Attorney bills came back today. It's the first month Mr. Gross's firm has gotten them in on time, because now his contract is up and now he wants to hurry up and get them in on time. I see lots of bills. And if you could go over, what happens when a child has an incident and the parent requests to see the video? This happens over and over again, and I'd like you to go over it this evening. WTE-ASC negotiations, it's outrageous that you're looking at that to do that right now. Let's hire a superintendent, stop worrying about the overstaffed administration. Mr. Nasser brought up that great remark, 92% of the school districts are doing better than us. I've brought it up, Kathleen Wood has brought it up. You need to do better. Asbury Park Press had an article on health insurance today. You need to look at it. Stop spending the money like it's monopoly. Mr. Smythe budgeted for smoke detectors at the high school, where my son is, and we still don't have them, and you didn't discuss it again tonight. You didn't replace the doors at intermediate or at Allenwood. So those were all items for last year, and you were also supposed to paint West Belmar. So before you start asking for more money, 2% is $1.3 million. Like Mr. Krupa said, give us a chart of what you're talking about. This made no sense to go around the circle all night long. This is the third meeting in a row you've done this. Have a presentation with a purpose. This is nonsense, and you keep doing it over and over and over again. Asbestos.
Thank you, Ms.
I don't
Cross. Your
want
time is up.
anyone touching
Thank
the
you, Ms.
trailers.
Cross. Your time
Right.
is up.
I don't want anyone touching the
Thank you.
trailers.
Your time is up. Thank you.
You have a blank
Ms. Cross, your
requester
time is
name,
up.
and you
Thank you.
talk about asbestos removal being done
Your
by the
time
town.
is up, Ms. Cross. Thank you.
And the township should not be doing
Cross,
anything
your
with
time
asbestos.
is up. Thank you.
It says
you.
removal of the two.
Ms. Cross, your time is up. Thank you. Ms. Cross, your time is up.
You let go of the mic. I'd like to finish my sentence. I do not want the township doing anything with the trailers. And answer to
Do
your
any other-
DOE approval, did you put in permits, or are you gonna do the same thing again?
Please sit down, you've been asked.
All right, can I have my papers? Sure.
Mr. Smythe, permits, at what point will they be filed?
Prior to starting the work.
Makes sense. And I know we've discussed this at 2 of the previous board meetings, the smoke detectors at the high school and the doors. They were part of the budget for this year, and that work has not started yet, correct?
That's correct, including the painting at West Belmar.
Okay, so it's not, there's nothing wrong with it, it's budgeted, we just haven't done it yet.
That would be correct. With regard to the smoke detectors at the high school, based on the facility assessment that was done by the architect, and as we look to develop the long-range facility plan and what may or may not be included in a referendum, they may not be done. But the funds were budgeted in the event that we needed to use them for the smoke detectors at the high school. However, the system's been operating fine all year. The other projects would still be slated to be completed out of this year's budget.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Kovacs, maybe you know the answer to this. When parents request video, to review video, is that something, do you know about that, how that works?
Depending on the nature of the request and whether or not the other children are included within the video. I don't know whether this district has the capability of blurring out the other children, but if you're talking about something like security footage to take a look at if there were an incident in the hallway where someone has subpoenaed that, depending on the nature of what can be revealed with other students, we've tried to come to some type of an accommodation. If it can't be blurred out, we have basically offered information to litigants, which is the situation I'm mostly familiar with, to basically confirm the events that could be viewed. I don't know that if we don't have the ability to block out other students involved, or not other students involved, but other students who may be shown, then we try to make some accommodation with the individual who's making a request.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have anything else?
DOE approval for the trailers.
Seeing none, could I have a motion? Yes.
President, could I just,
Sure.
because again, time sensitive, Crimson Knight Foundation Annual Spring Gala is on March 26th, I believe, and the honorees are Mr. Radu, the Brookdale president.
David Stout
And Dara,
from NBC News?
yes.
Right?
I had it open, somehow it got closed.
Dara Brown.
Right, so, you know, I just want to encourage people to attend and support that foundation, which is other parents in the district which are looking to help the schools.
Thank you. Mr. Smythe, DOE approval, at what point do we get something from them? Have we heard from them?
The architect, Spiesel, has been in communication with the Department of Ed. They've been reviewing it. The requirement is with regard to updating the long-range facility plan, but we anticipate having approval before we start construction with the county.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Seeing none, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Have a good night.